Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was balanced on. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
About the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.
Good afternoon. The first item of business is portfolio questions. I start with education and skills. Can I remind members that questions 4 and 6 are grouped together? So question 4 gets a supplementary, question 6 gets a supplementary. Anyone who wants to ask a supplementary thereafter comes in after questions 4 and 6. I hope you took notes. Question 1, Alexander Burnett.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it is responding to reports that knowledge of changes in pupil performance is at a 70-year low.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, we simply do not agree with this assertion. We now collect and publish literacy and numeracy performance data at national, local authorities, school and stage level on an annual basis. This data covers around 50,000 pupils and gives us detailed information on writing, reading, listening and talking and numeracy. We did not have anything approaching this much detail when Curriculum for Excellence was implemented.
Alexander Burnett.
Presiding Officer, the Independent Commission on School Reform were clear last week that our data on school performance is worse now than at any time since the 1950s. And that's because the SNP have scrapped almost every survey of pupil performance and pulled Scotland out of every international study except Pisa, which incidentally showed our schools plummeting to record lows in maths and science. So if a Cabinet Secretary is so convinced that he's making improvements to Scottish education, why does he keep abolishing any impartial evidence that could back him up.
Cabinet Secretary.
I completely disagree with Mr Burnett's series of baseless assertions. The Government has subscribed to the Pisa analysis, which was reported on 2 weeks ago. Last week, I came here and made a statement based on the collection of data on the performance of 50,000 pupils across different levels of curriculum for excellence, which, when that data is published, enables us to respond to the challenges that that data throws up about performance within individual schools, so we can actually improve outcomes for individual children and young people within our education system. So I believe we have more data, more information and more ability to improve performance within Scottish education and, as a consequence, improve outcomes for children and young people. And as a matter of fact, for Mr Burnett, the data on Scottish education in the PISA analysis shows that performance in reading has improved significantly and performance in maths and science is stable, although it needs to improve, and that's what we're working to achieve.
Thank you. Question 2, Ross Greer.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether the review of coordinated support plans for children with additional needs will be conducted as part of or subsequent to the Morgan Review of Additional Support Needs.
Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, as part of the review of additional support for learning, Angela Morgan is considering the different approaches to planning that are used to meet children and young people's needs. Ms Morgan will report to Scottish Ministers and COSLA in early 2020. The findings from her review will then be used to inform the work that has been taken forward to enhance implementation of additional support for learning, including the review of the use of coordinated support plans.
Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The reason I asked this question is in response to a written question I lodged, the Cabinet Secretary said that the review of coordinated support plans would take place as part of the Morgan Review. I wrote to those conducting the Morgan Review who confirmed the opposite, that it would take place subsequent to their review. So I'm simply asking for a very clear clarification. Will it be part of the Morgan Review or will it be subsequent to the Morgan Review? Because I currently have two contradictory answers.
Cabinet Secretary.
I apologise if we've been unclear in communicating to Mr Greer the position. What the answer I've just put on the record is designed to say is that Angela Morgan will be considering the different approaches to planning that are used to meet children and young people's needs. That may raise issues about coordinated support plans, which we will then go on to review as a consequence. So if we've not expressed that clearly enough, I hope that it sets out the position as clearly as I can today.
Ian Gray, followed by Beatrice Wisher.
Thank you. As the Cabinet Secretary knows, this is really important because the coordinated support plan is the only mechanism which gives a child and its family recourse to certain legal rights. Back in August, figures we had discovered showed that even if you look at those children with additional support needs who receive support not just from education but from social work as well, only 3% have coordinated support plans and therefore access to those legal rights. So whether it's through the Morgan Review or subsequently to the Morgan Review, will the Deputy First Minister undertake to take some action to ensure that more children with additional support needs get access to the legal rights which this Parliament has legislated for them?
Cabinet Secretary.
I agree entirely with the direction of Mr Gray's point that any child or young person that has the necessity for a coordinated support plan should have that coordinated support plan. That was the legislative intent of Parliament, and that is what should be applied. Now, as Mr Gray will know, the decision on whether a young person has a coordinated support plan is not mine. It is the statutory responsibility of local authorities. Now, that's not in any way to pass responsibility. It's to recognise that statutory fact. But I take seriously the point that Mr Gray raises, that if a child needs a coordinated support plan, they should have that. That is the intent of legislation, and what I hope comes out of the Morgan Review is information which enables us to take more action, if it is required, to address the issue that Mr Gray has raised with me today.
Beatrice Wisher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the last 10 years, the number of additional support needs teachers has reduced, while the number of pupils requiring ASN support has increased markedly, with 31% recorded as having an additional support needs. One ASN teacher described to me the heavy workload, with GIRFEC forms for each pupil taking up to 4-6 hours to complete. How can the Scottish Government ensure that ASN teachers have time to devote to pupils while dealing with the necessary paperwork?
Cabinet Secretary.
The first point I'd make, Presiding Officer, is that obviously the definition of additional support needs has been expanded significantly in the period that Beatrice Wisher refers to, which accounts for the significant expansion in the number of young people presenting with additional support needs. And it also demonstrates the fact that we are trying to address the needs of those young people within the mainstream education system, where of course we have an increasing number of teachers within the system. In relation to all staff who are supporting pupils with additional support needs, we are seeing a rise in those staff. The most recent data in 2018 is 17,412, which is an increase from 16,343 the previous year. What's important to recall here is the necessity of ensuring that the needs of individual children and young people are met and met properly. That's what statute says. And therefore, whether that support is provided by a mainstream teacher properly trained to deliver that support, or whether it's by additional specific staff dealing with additional support needs, we have to make sure that the needs of children and young people are met, and that responsibility falls in statute to local authorities to ensure that is the case.
Question 3, Colin Smyth.
Officer, and my apologies that due to other parliamentary business I need to leave after my question, to ask the Scottish Government when the root cause analysis report on the North West Community Campus in Dumfries will be published.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the root cause analysis report has now been finalised with Dumfries and Galloway Council and other stakeholders. The Scottish Futures Trust will publish the report along with lessons learned early in the new year.
Colin Smyth.
Thank you, President Officer. When I asked the same question in August, the Cabinet Secretary's reply then was to say the review was complete. So I'm unsure why it's taken 6 months to get to where we are. But given that the company responsible for the shoddy workmanship at the North West Community Campus continue to receive millions of pounds of taxpayers' money for public sector contracts, and this review is being carried out by the Scottish Futures Trust, who are part of the model that let people down when it came to the construction of this school, how can people be reassured that this review will get to the real cause of the problem and not simply be a whitewash?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think it would be best to see the report once it's published. That might give an insight into what the report raises, because what I would expect the report to do is to look at the circumstances that have led to the issues, the very real issues that presented themselves at the North West Community Campus. Now, I'm not going to prejudge that report. It'll come out. I'm happy to consider the issues that arise out of that. And I'm not going to speculate on what might be in its contents. It's safe to say that it is important that the highest quality work is undertaken on a contractual basis by all contractors, and where that is not the case, contractors should be held to account.
Question 4, Angus MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the latest teacher number statistics and what steps it's taking to retain teachers at all levels of education.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the school census data published last week demonstrates that the action the Scottish Government is taking on teacher recruitment is working. Teacher numbers have increased for the 4th year in a row, rising to 52,247 in 2019, which is an increase of 288 on the previous year. We now have a 10-year high in overall teacher numbers and a 39-year high in primary teacher numbers. To further improve recruitment, we are offering bursaries for career changers to undertake teacher education in STEM subjects. A new phase of our recruitment campaign is underway, and we have added Napier and Queen Margaret universities as teacher education providers.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you. I thank the Deputy First Minister for his reply and welcome the new numbers. I know he's acutely aware of the current Gaelic teacher shortage, and I welcome the action taken by the Scottish Government to date to increase the numbers, such as the Gaelic Immersion for Teachers or GIFT programme. Also, the bursaries offered through Board na Gaelic to help with course fees are welcome. However, has the Scottish Government given any consideration to raising the bursary level higher to match the STEM bursary, which would go a long way towards encouraging more teachers into GME?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr MacDonald is correct that Gaelic teacher education is a priority for the Scottish Government, and I discussed many of these issues at a gathering of Gaelic medium educators just a couple of weeks ago in Edinburgh, where we were focusing on some of these challenges. Now, the question of the bursary level is a matter for Board na Gaelic. I think it's a welcome intervention that Board na Gaelic have made, and the Board also offers a variety of other teaching support to help individuals participate. Now, of course, I'll raise with Board na Gaelic the suggestion that Mr MacDonald has made today. Could I also say that one of the challenges that we need to address is whether or not there are more teachers who are Gaelic speakers could be persuaded to strengthen their capacity within the Gaelic language to therefore be able to be part of the Gaelic medium education system within Scotland. And that's one of the themes that's being examined in the Faster Rate of Progress initiative on the Gaelic language that I commenced in August 2018, and which is about ensuring that we deliver on the contents of the Gaelic National Plan formulated by Bord na Gaelic and approved by ministers.
Question 6, Gil Patterson.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to improve teacher recruitment.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, we continue to support universities in the development of new and alternative routes into teaching, including a focus on increasing the number of STEM teachers. These routes into teaching have attracted around 800 people over the last 2 years who may not otherwise have entered teaching. We are offering bursaries of £20,000 for career changers to do teacher training in STEM subjects where the demand is at its greatest. A new phase of our Teaching Makes People recruitment campaign is underway, and as I indicated to Mr MacDonald, we have added Napier and Queen Margaret universities as teacher education providers.
Gil Patterson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? The latest statistics demonstrate the Scottish Government recruitment drive is certainly working. For comparison, can the Cabinet Secretary tell the Parliament and inform the public at the same time how the ratio of teachers to pupils in Scotland compares with the ratio elsewhere in the United Kingdom?
Cabinet Secretary.
Officer, can I just add to what I said earlier on in relation to the new initial teacher education providers? I've just yesterday visited Napier University in Edinburgh, and some weeks ago visited the new Principal and Vice-Chancellor at Queen Margaret University, our former clerk Paul Grice, to see the new initial teacher education courses at Queen Margaret. And I want to pay tribute to both universities for taking the initiative to offer their services in this important endeavour where they are delivering very strong results. In relation to Mr Patterson's question, there are fewer pupils per teacher in Scotland than in any other country in the United Kingdom. While the data is not directly comparable, we can say that in primary schools there are 15.9 pupils per teacher in Scotland, compared to 20.9 in England, 22 in Wales and 22.3 in Northern Ireland. And in the secondary sector there are 12.4 pupils per teacher in Scotland, compared to 16.3 in England, 17 in Wales and 15.7 in Northern Ireland.
Question 5, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what financial backing it will provide to North Ayrshire Council to support the construction of a new Ardrossan Academy.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am pleased that an Ardrossan Community Learning and Innovation Hub to replace Ardrossan Academy and Winton Primary School is one of the projects to benefit from the first phase of the new £1 billion Learning Estate Investment Programme.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Can he advise how much the SNP Government has invested in building new schools in North Ayrshire since 2007, and what has been delivered for that investment compared to the £400 million it is costing North Ayrshire's people over 30 years for the 5 PFI schools built by Labour prior to 2007?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government supported the construction of Garnock Community Campus and the Largs campus. Both of these campuses, of course, are 2 to 18 campuses, and we supported them with significant funding of over £44 million. Now, that funding has enabled the creation of 2 world-class educational facilities in North Ayrshire. I know they will be well used by North Ayrshire Council, and they are, of course, offered as part of sustainable funding, unlike the expensive system of PFI, which is such a burden for local authorities across the country.
Question 7, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether the performance of Scotland in maths and science that was recorded in the recent Pisa results is its poorest.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Pisa results for 2018 show our performance in science and maths is in line with the OECD average and statistically similar to the Scotland results from the previous survey in 2015. The results are stable, but stable is not good enough. We are committed to the measures that we have put in place to drive improvement in attainment across Scotland, and in particular to close the poverty-related attainment gap.
If you're brief, I managed to get your colleague, Mr Cameron, in So your supplementary, please.
Then I shall be brief, Presiding Officer. I asked very specifically about the Pisa results, which show that Scotland's performance in maths and science is at record lows, with maths falling from 17th to 31st since the SNP took office. It is an appalling indictment of this government's mismanagement and a shameful legacy to bequeath our children. Has the Cabinet Secretary any ideas how to arrest this slide, and when will the statistics start improving?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Kerr could have possibly said that our reading score has improved significantly. But he chose not to, because what he did was he indulged in the perpetual, miserable, anti-education agenda of the Conservatives, which is all about talking down Scottish education. They tried it in the election last week and they took a hammering. They were sent homeward to think again. Scottish education is improving and the Conservatives are going downhill very, very fast.
Question 8, Donald Cameron.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to support pupil learning in the Highlands and Islands region.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is undertaking a range of actions to support pupil learning in the Highlands and Islands. In 2019-20, schools in the 4 Highlands and Islands authorities together received a total of over £4 million in pupil equity funding. In the same year, Highland Council received over £0.9 million in Gaelic-specific grant to help them meet the costs of Gaelic education. And Highland Council is also in receipt of £4 million in capital funding to support the building of the new Gaelic school in the Inverness area. And in 2018-19, around £750,000 of Scottish Government funding was used by the Northern Alliance Regional Improvement Collaborative to support educational improvement across the Alliance region, including in the Highlands and Islands.
Donald Cameron, briefly, please.
Thank you. New figures published by the Scottish Government show that in the Highland Council region, teachers reported that in Primary 7, just 60% of pupils had reached the expected level for writing and 62% for numeracy. Does the Deputy First Minister accept these figures are totally unacceptable? And what will his government do specifically for Primary 7 children in the Highland Council region?
Well,
Cabinet Secretary.
As a consequence of the extensive data that the Scottish Government has put in place, which totally contradicts Mr Burnett's silly question at the first question, because of the data that we've put in place, we now are able to have the discussion that Mr Cameron has raised with me, where he is quite right that performance levels in Highland schools need to improve, which is why the Government puts in place the financial support to the Northern Alliance to assist in building and improving educational performance. So because of the data we've put in place, we know where the challenges are, we can support schools to improve performance, and that's exactly what the Scottish Government is going to do.
Thank you. That concludes questions on those portfolios, and we'll briefly move on in a moment to health and sport when ministers are ready. Question 1, Sarah Warwick.
To ask the Scottish Government what the impact has been of the Scottish Ambulance Service's response times policy.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
The impact of the introduction of a new clinical response model within the ambulance service in November 2016 has been extremely positive. By focusing on responding as quickly as possible to the sickest of patients, the new model is saving more lives. Evaluation of the new model showed a 44% increase in 30-day survival rates for cardiac arrest patients in the first year. This equates to 1,182 people. In this year to date, of the 547 cardiac arrest calls the service has attended to where the patient has presented with a shockable rhythm, 54.8% of these patients have been taken to hospital following SAS achieving a return of spontaneous circulation.
Sarah Warwick.
Can I thank the Minister for his answer and say that I want to raise a particular issue in terms of what I believe is a mismatch between the Scottish Ambulance Service guidelines, which put diabetic patients at low priority, and the advice of Diabetes UK, which states that any patient who becomes unconscious due to hypo needs an ambulance. And I would like to know whether the Scottish Government agrees with Diabetes UK on this. The context is that one of my constituents was unconscious and didn't just wait 3.5 hours for an ambulance. He waited 3.5 hours for the ambulance service to check whether he was still alive and needed support.
Minister.
Thank the member for her question. Obviously, the specific issue that the member raises is one that she's written to the government on and has received a response. And I think she'll be aware that there's now a formal investigation as to why that happened, because clearly that 3-hour-plus wait to get that clinical callback is not acceptable. It is appropriate that the ambulance service triages to make sure that the people who are most in need of an ambulance get that fastest, and that is working and that is saving lives. But clearly, in order to have that triage working properly, then there needs to be those callbacks. So I'm aware that the particular case that the member is talking about is being investigated by the Scottish Ambulance Service.
Briefly, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the Minister how often in some time frame emergency calls are waiting whilst Orkney's only land ambulance resource is already on a call? And has there ever been a time where there's been no land ambulance cover?
I think it's
mainland
unfortunate.
Orkney?
We can't quite hear you clearly, Mr MacArthur. I'll get the recording people to put it up.
how
You've got
often
such a
in-
gentle voice.
I do my best.
You'd repeat
I do
it.
my best. How often in some time frame are emergency calls waiting whilst Orkney's only land ambulance resource is already on a call? And has there ever been a time where there has been no land ambulance available on mainland Orkney over the last 6 months?
Minister.
Well, I thank the member for his question and for repeating it. I think it's maybe something that I need to go and look at. I'm actually speaking to the Scottish Ambulance Service tomorrow morning, so I'll raise the point that he's raised with them directly.
Question 2, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that since 2009 the number of GP practices in Tayside has fallen from 69 to 63, while the average practice list size has increased.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
The reason for the reduction in GP practice numbers in Tayside is in part a result of practice mergers since 2009. Mergers can prevent practices, particularly small or single-handed ones, from closing by reducing risk and increasing resilience. Since 2009, in addition, 3 practices have closed in Tayside. Bridgeverne, Ardler and Stobswell were all small independent practices. The Government has put a number of specific measures in place to support GP practices, which I'm happy to ensure Mr Fraser has detail of.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. I've been contacted by constituents in Perth who have raised concerns about the times they're having to wait for a GP appointment, a situation which has been made much worse recently following the closure of the GP practice in Bridgeverne and the allocation, without any consultation, of hundreds of extra patients to the lists of city GP practices. What more can the Scottish Government do to assist with this situation?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Mr Fraser for that additional question. Of course, as he knows, as I do, that the Bridgeverne practice closure was, I think probably the best way to describe this, is not well handled. And we have raised those matters directly with NHS Tayside to ensure that we don't see a repetition of that. We've also, I think, been in contact with the GPs from that particular practice and have offered to hear from them about what additional steps that they would find helpful from that practice, but also from the practice that the patients have been reallocated to, if there are additional measures that they would find useful for us to offer them to be able to accommodate those additional patients. The final point I'd make, though, is, as Mr Fraser knows, primary care and GP practices isn't just about GP numbers. It is about the whole multidisciplinary team, and I'm pleased to say that across NHS Tayside, including in Perth, we have seen a significant increase in the level of multidisciplinary teams using the skills, the professional skills of advanced nurse practitioners, of pharmacists and pharmacist assistants, and of physios. Of course, there is more to do, but I'm happy to take any specific suggestions that he might have with respect to the practice he's referencing.
Question 3, Maurice Corrie.
Government what action it is taking in response to reports of worsening delays in the waiting times for children and young people to receive mental health treatment.
Minister Claire Hockey.
I have been absolutely clear that long waits for children and young people to access mental health treatment are unacceptable. There is no simple solution in the face of increased demand for children and young people's mental health services. And that's why we're undertaking an ambitious programme of work to monitor and drive performance in mental health waiting times across Scotland, while also supporting early intervention in community settings and across the third sector, local government and the NHS. And this includes £250 million to support positive mental health for children and young people, in addition to £58 million over 4 years, specifically to improve access to CAMHS and psychological therapies and to invest in additional staff. And through the Children and Young People's Mental Health and Wellbeing Programme Board, jointly chaired with COSLA, we're implementing the key recommendations from the COIA Task Force, the Youth Commission on Mental Health and the SAMH audit of rejected referrals.
Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for her answer, and I understand what she's saying. But nevertheless, local delivery plan standards state that 90% of young people are to start treatment for these services within 18 weeks of referral. However, the most recent release shows that only 64.5% met this standard in the last quarter. Will the Minister explain why this mental health crisis has not improved, despite a commitment to improve early interventions?
Minister.
Well, as I said in my previous answer, we're working very closely with CAMHS and others to ensure that we do improve the overall performance of CAMHS waiting time standards. We've committed to publishing a new CAMHS specification which lays out the standards that children and young people and their families can expect, and this work has also been informed by the SAMH audit of rejected referrals. And the 2019-2020 programme for government, we set out our plans to work with NHS boards to deliver trajectories to meet the mental health waiting time standards by December 2020, and these trajectories will be set out in boards' annual operating plans, ensuring that performance is tied to funding.
Mary Fee, briefly.
Looked after children are a group for whom CAMHS support can be vital. When children move placements and into new areas, they can drop off already long waiting lists and end up at the back of the queue. What assessment has the Government done on this situation, and what action are they taking to ensure all looked after children can access appropriate mental health support when they need it?
Minister.
I thank Mary Fee for raising that issue, and if she remembers that part of the COIA Task Force, one of the strands of that work was to look after vulnerable children, or to highlight children who were at risk, both those who are looked after and accommodated, but also those who are in the youth justice system and going through children's panel hearings. So certainly the mental health, children and young people's mental health and wellbeing delivery board will be looking at the specific recommendations made by the COIA Task Force to ensure that that particularly vulnerable group do not fall through gaps.
Question 4, Bob Doris.
To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to extend access to palliative care services for homeless people.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
Our strategic framework for action on palliative and end-of-life care makes clear that we want everyone who would benefit from palliative care to have access to it, including those who are homeless. To achieve this vision, it's essential that health and social care professionals have early planning consideration with those nearing the end of their life to ensure that people get the care and support that is right for them. With this in mind, we've focused our efforts on supporting frontline health and social care services to engage more frequently and meaningfully with homeless individuals so that they can access care and support services as quickly as possible.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Minister for that answer. I chair the cross-party group in this Parliament on palliative care. Our CPG have suggested improvements, including palliative care nurse specialists working with homeless services and palliative care beds specifically for homeless individuals and a range of other measures. Will the Minister carefully consider the range of innovative suggestions that we have made to improve service to this highly excluded group?
Minister.
Thank Bob Doris for his question and for the cross-party group for their work and efforts, and their suggestions are a useful contribution to the discussion, and I will make sure that they are passed on to the Homelessness Prevention and Strategy Group, which is co-chaired by the Minister for Local Government and COSLA. That oversees the implementation of the Ending Homelessness Together Action Plan and includes a public health representative. At their last meeting on the 10th of December, they had a discussion about the next steps that could be taken to improve joint working between health and homelessness services. So I think that's an appropriate area to make sure we're getting that joined up working to look at the very important issues that the member and the cross-party group have raised.
Monica Lennon, briefly.
Sadly, a rising number of homeless people are discharged from hospital with no home to go to. The Scottish Government has said previously it has no plans to update research or collate data on the use of health services by homeless people. Is this something the Scottish Government will look at again?
Minister.
I think the data that the member is referring to was collated in 2018. So I think what we need to do is to, again, partly looking at the working group that I talked about, the HPSG, look at how we can use that data to ensure that we do make sure people get the support that they need when they need. Clearly, one of the first areas around that is making sure that when we're dealing with people in this situation, that their housing needs are met, and that's why the housing first model is, I think, really, really important. Understanding that people have complex needs, but if you've got a complex health need and you don't have someplace to stay, then clearly it is really difficult for us to. So I think the housing model is really positive and provides us with an opportunity. Clearly, it's early days in terms of how that is implemented and rolled out, and I know there's a number of different models across the country about housing first is being implemented, but feedback so far that I've anecdotally heard is generally positive.
Question 5, Edward Mount.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to assist NHS Highland to reduce its reliance on locum staff.
Cabinet Secretary.
The number of medical and dental staff in NHS Highland has in fact increased by 55.2% between 2006 and 2019. However, NHS Highland continues to focus on reducing both the cost of locums and their reliance on them. Ongoing actions taken by the board include a weekly control meeting, ongoing cost improvement programme, continuing work to recruit the cohort of clinical fellow posts, continuing work to recruit to permanent posts, including offering flexible working and alternative roles to encourage doctors in particular to work in NHS Highland, and they have also been engaged with a medical recruitment agency focusing on international recruitment to vacant posts across NHS Highland, in some way emulating the success of NHS Grampian in that regard. They're also working with the NHS Scottish Global Citizenship Programme, which offers new opportunities to doctors to work as remote and rural consultants in rural general hospitals while being able to participate in global citizenship in both Scotland and abroad.
Edward Mount.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. And now we know that the construction of the new elective care centre will be delayed until early next year. And latest figures show that NHS Highland are spending over £20 million a year on bank relief and agency staff payrolls. Is the Cabinet Secretary sure she will be able to fully staff the elective care centre when it is finally finished without increasing these costs?
Cabinet Secretary.
So in the overall NHS Highland spend, it is worth noting that in terms of agency use of nursing and midwifery agency staff, that figure has decreased. So whilst overall Mr Mountain is correct, I do think facts are important. In terms of where NHS Highland is concerned, I'm sure he'll be pleased to know that in the last quarter, the vacancy rate in NHS Highland decreased to 11.7%, whilst the number of longer-term consultant vacancies of 6 months or more also decreased by 7.4%. So there's a range of work going on in terms of recruitment in these areas. Perhaps one of the most interesting is the work that we're undertaking with the Royal College of Surgeons and the North region, so that includes NHS Highland, NHS Grampian and NHS Tayside, to create the Scottish Clinical Collaborative, which will see consultants, very experienced consultants towards the end of their career, taking time to work in remote and rural areas, which will be, of course, of great assistance to NHS Highland. Part of our workforce planning includes building into what we need in terms of the elective centres, as well as a number of other parts of our service, and I'm sure Mr Mountain will have been pleased to see the publication of the Integrated Workforce Plan on Monday of this week.
Question 6 not lodged. Question 7, Peter Chapman.
The Scottish Government what measures it plans to take in response to statistics showing that 65.4% of patients referred to NHS Grampian were treated within 18 weeks.
Cabinet Secretary.
As part of the Scottish Government's Waiting Times Improvement Plan, we're making available more than £108 million to health boards in this financial year. This to increase capacity in the system, for example, more staffing, evening and weekend clinics, additional theatre sessions, all of which ensure progress towards delivering on that plan's trajectories. This does include over £11 million provided to NHS Grampian, where recent improvements using those additional funds have been put in place, including increasing capacity at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, recruitment of additional staff, utilising additional capacity at Strathcarroll Regional Treatment Centre and at the Golden Jubilee Hospital, in particular for orthopaedic patients.
Peter Chapman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but sadly when it comes to NHS Grampian, long waiting times is a familiar story, and in the North East we fall far below the national average. And on the back of this news, an NHS Grampian spokesperson stated that if a patient's condition worsens, they should contact their GP. However, recent GP figures show that Grampian has lost 13 GP surgeries in the last 10 years, with longer waiting times and a decreasing number of GP surgeries. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain how patients are able to get the vital treatment that they need?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, treatment for elective work primarily, but also the initiation in many cases of the cancer waiting times. And I think it is just fair to point out that in terms of NHS Grampian, they have for the second quarter met the 31-day cancer wait time target and are seeing an improvement in terms of the 62-day target. But in terms, for most patients, the trigger for those referrals is their GP surgery, so I can understand in some way why that piece of advice was from Mr Chapman given to a particular patient. However, I expect boards to be in constant touch with patients who are on their waiting list, keeping them updated as to when they should expect their appointment to be met, and explaining to them why there are delays, if there are delays. If there are particular instances for Mr Chapman where that has not happened, then I'd be very happy to hear about those so I can deal with those directly with NHS Grampian, as I have done with other boards.
Question 8, Willie Coffey.
To ask the Scottish Government how many people in East Ayrshire receive free personal or nursing care, what the qualifying age groups are to receive this, and what the annual cost is.
Cabinet Secretary.
So the latest figures available show that in free personal and nursing care from the Scottish statistics, the number of people in receipt of free personal and nursing care in 17-18, that's the latest figures in East Ayrshire, was 1,680 at a cost of £13.3 million. As Mr Coffey will know, as of April this year, personal care is free for all eligible adults.
Willie Coffey.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and the very positive impact this service, unique to Scotland, is having on the most vulnerable people in my constituency. Are there any plans to formally evaluate the impact and outcomes of the policy so that we might be able to consider further improvements in this important area of care in the years to come?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's an interesting question from Mr Coffey. I'm very grateful to him for it. There are no specific plans for that evaluation, although I'm very happy to give some further thought to how we might do that and whether that would produce valuable information to us. He will be aware, though, of course, that we are undertaking a programme of work. We've undertaken it this year. We will conclude it in the coming year. It's in programme for government on the reform of adult social care. I've recently had a very useful meeting with Alzheimer's Scotland to look at what more we might do in terms of personal care and health care for those individuals suffering from dementia. All of that will allow us to look at what more we might do in these areas within and balance all of that. Of course, we may have to do much of it in a phased way depending on the overall cost, but I'm very open to, and the work is underway, about what more we might do in terms of providing the personal care as well as the health care support for adults who require that from us, in order that we can ensure that they can live as independently, with respect, and as close to home as possible.
Thank you. That concludes questions on health and sport. We'll move shortly on to questions in communities and local government. And while we're doing that, can I say the third portfolio, and remind members that questions 2 and 4 are grouped together. However, the member Jamie Green, who's lodged question 2, is not here. he better have a good explanation. So we'll be moving from 1 straight on to 4 and then on to 3, because I know members are sort of expecting that. Question 1, Claire Baker.
To ask the Scottish Government what funding streams and other support are available for alternative mechanisms to the Business Improvement District model.
Cabinet Secretary Aileen Campbell.
Bids are a means to help empower local businesses to raise their own funds to deliver their locally agreed plans, and there are no set funding streams for alternative mechanisms. The Scottish Government funds Scotland's Town Partnership to provide support to organisations and groups that have an interest in establishing bids or other approaches to improving their town centres and neighbourhoods.
Claire Baker.
The Cabinet Secretary may be aware of the challenges being faced in 5 towns this year. While this week businesses in Cooper have supported the Digital Improvement District, in Dunfermline the bid Dunfermline Delivers lost the recent ballot, and they're re-emerging as a public interest company which has some funding from Fife Council as a transitional measure, but they are seeking alternative funding. And this year also Kirkcaldy for All decided not to go for a third ballot, and they're trying to reinvent themselves as a digital innovation district. As the Cabinet Secretary can see, the model is fragile, and can I ask what consideration has been given to how the changing nature of the High Street and the pressure on our businesses is impacting on the ability of bids to be successful?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, I welcome the news that Cooper have approved their Digital Improvement District, the first in Scotland, which is to be welcomed. And of course we are disappointed that Dunfermline Delivers was unsuccessful in going forward for that reballot. I understand, as Claire Baker said, that the Council is looking at options to build on the work of Dunfermline Delivers and has agreed to provide that transition fund that she describes to help them possibly repurpose and develop a new bid. And I know certainly I met with the constituency member Shirley-Ann Somerville regarding this, and I know she has been helping this group. So of course we do want to make sure that we keep bids under review to make sure that they're delivering for the town centres that they are there for. There is lots of success across the country, and that's why again Scotland's Town Partnership is wanting to seek to develop a new and more expansive model for bids, ones that delivers for more inclusive and energetic partnerships, improves resources and impact, and ultimately brings greater sustainable growth to all areas all over Scotland. And STP are looking to ensure that they can support bids in a more fulsome way, so that they can maybe try and avoid some of the disappointment that I know has been expressed in Dunfermline, to help empower our communities to take more control and charge over their town centres. So happy again to engage with the member. I know that Shirley-Ann Somerville has been making good representations on behalf of Dunfermline Delivers, but Fife has also benefited from a number of other funding streams, such as the RCGF fund since 2013 as well, to support town centres across the region.
Question 4, Tom Arthur.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government how it supports communities in tackling inequality.
Cabinet Secretary.
In 2018, we invested over £1.4 billion on support directed at low-income families. This includes key investment to deliver more affordable homes, tackle fuel poverty, support our Attainment Scotland Fund, and over £100 million to mitigate the worst impacts of UK government welfare cuts. Our new £11.5 million Investing in Communities Fund will provide vital support and investment to around 250 organisations to enable them to tackle poverty, inequality and rural disadvantage across our communities. And our Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan outlines our concrete action to reduce child poverty, and this includes plans for our new Scottish Child Payment worth £10 per child per week that will be paid to eligible families with a child under 6 by Christmas next year.
Tom Arthur.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? Auchenbach Active, based at the Auchenbach Resource Centre in Barrhead in my constituency of Renfrewshire South, do a power of work to tackle inequality in their community, including distributing Christmas presents so that children from across the area will receive a gift over the festive period. Will the Cabinet Secretary join me in thanking Auchenbach Active for all the work they do all year round, and will she accept my invitation to visit the Auchenbach Resource Centre next year to see their brilliant work firsthand?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely. I pay tribute, like Tom Arthur has, to the work and effort and endeavour that Auchenbach Active are clearly doing across their community. For some of that effort, I wish they didn't have to do it, if only there wasn't the severe welfare cuts that had been imposed in too many of our communities. Work like that wouldn't be necessary. However, it is to the testimony and pay tribute to Auchenbach for not sitting back and letting that happen and ensuring that children in that area are getting the support they deserve. And the work of community-led organisations like Auchenbach Active is truly inspiring, delivering tangible positive outcomes for people locally. And I would be happy to commend the good work that they are doing, and happy to also visit the organisation next year if Tom Arthur would get in touch with my office. I'm sure we'll be able to fix up a date soon.
Thank you. Question 3, Fulton McGregor.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to encourage more house building in heavily populated urban towns and areas such as in Coatbridge.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scottish planning policy is clear that development plans should guide most new urban development to take place within existing settlements or in planned extensions. And we're now preparing Scotland's 4th National Planning Framework, which will set out where development is needed to support sustainable and inclusive growth areas in Scotland.
Fulton McGregor.
Can I thank the Minister for that response? He will be aware that in Coatbridge, which makes up the largest part of my constituency, new housing is very much welcome to regenerate the area and improve living standards. Whereas in the northern part of my constituency, such as in Steps and Gartcosh, new developments are often more controversial because they are proposed often to be on Greenbelt. I would just take this brief opportunity, Presiding Officer, to again pay tribute to the work of the Safe Steps Greenbelt Group, for example, who I've written to the Minister about previously. Can I ask the Minister, therefore, what the Scottish Government is doing to encourage house building on derelict and brownfield sites in urban areas over greenfield land?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scottish planning policy quite clearly states that the reuse or redevelopment of brownfield land should be considered before new development takes place on greenfield sites. The efficient use of our finite resource will also be considered in the review of the National Planning Framework, which we're about to embark on.
Question 5, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government how its planning policy and guidance to local authorities on takeaway food outlets takes account of its policies on healthy eating.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, the 2018 research report on the relationship between the food environment and the planning system notes the lack of interaction between Scottish planning policy and diet. And we have committed to exploring this further as we prepare the 4th National Planning Framework, and we would welcome discussion of these issues as part of the engagement programme for MPF4.
Colin Beattie.
I thank the Minister for his response. In my constituency of Midlothian North and Musselburgh, there have been several instances where a multiplicity of new takeaway food outlets have been rejected by both the local community and the council, but which were approved by the government reporter on appeal. Are stronger guidelines favouring healthy eating likely to be developed?
Minister. Presiding Officer, I agree completely and utterly that planning policy should do all that it can to support health and well-being in all of our communities across Scotland. And as I said in my previous answer, I would welcome views from within the Chamber and beyond on how this can be achieved. We will begin early engagement on MPF4 from January of next year. I should say that in the meantime, reporters are required to make their decision in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise, having fully considered all of the evidence before them, including representations from members of the public. I would welcome any submission that Mr Beattie wants to put forward in terms of getting this right for MPF4, as I would every other member. Thank you.
Brian Whittle, briefly, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I wonder if what the Minister's response would be to a council in England who have managed to implement an exclusion zone around schools for food vans, and whether the Scottish Government would again consider this as a way forward to health eating planning.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, as I said, I would welcome any submission from any member on this, and if they want to provide evidence of what has happened elsewhere, I'm more than willing to look at that. National Planning Framework 4 will be, of course, a situation where we go out and consult with as many stakeholders as possible on a variety of issues. I know that many have an interest in terms of healthy eating and the part that planning can play in all of that. As I said to Mr Beattie, I would welcome any submission from Mr Whittle on this subject.
Question 6 not lodged. Question 7, Mike Rumbles.
To ask the Scottish Government, further to its answer to question S500381, what plans it has to require privately owned flats and tower blocks over 11 metres high to have fire safety certification?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, there are no plans to introduce the fire safety certification of the type that Mr Rumbles describes. Provisions to address fire safety in buildings are required under building regulations at the point building work is carried out. This applies to all dwellings, regardless of tenure or building height. The member may be interested to also know that we have produced fire safety information leaflets containing advice for residents in high-rises on how to prevent fires in the home and what to do if one starts in their building. And these are being delivered to all homes in high-rise buildings and will also be available in libraries and community centres.
Mike Rumbles.
Whilst we know that building regulations are not retrospective, in fact the Minister said that to me last time, Scottish ministers have the power to direct local authorities to require existing buildings to conform to current building standards under Section 25 of the Building Scotland Act 2003. Why is the Minister so reluctant to use it?
Minister.
This is a very complex area, and I often get castigated in this chamber for using ministerial direction, which I do very rarely indeed. If Mr Rumbles wants to sit down with me and building standards officials to discuss this in some depth, I am more than happy to do so. One of the things which I should make quite clear, Presiding Officer, is that the Scottish Government is not complacent about building standards, and that is why we put in place the expert panels to advise us on building standards and on fire safety. And we will continue to engage on all of these issues in order that we get things right. But I do think that members would be very, very upset if I started using ministerial direction, but I am more than happy to talk to Mr Rumbles further on this issue.
Sarah Boyack.
I'm very interested in the Minister's comments there. I think it's appropriate we get this right. But in the meantime, what advice would the Minister give to my constituents who are still experiencing problems and have concerns about the valuation of their properties when they attempt to sell the flats and put them on the market?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I share Ms Boyack's concerns. And my heart goes out to those folks who are finding difficulty at this moment in time in selling properties and moving on. And that is why I met with officials again, our officials again this morning, to try and ensure that we can move UK finance, but more importantly, the UK government further forward on this particular issue. As members are aware, I've written to Robert Jenrick, the UK Secretary of State, twice on this issue, with a reminder letter as well. And I hope that now that the UK Parliament is back, that Mr Jenrick will furnish us with a response so that we can do what is necessary to ensure that Ms Boyack's constituents and many others across the country can get out of the difficulties that they are currently in. But the Chamber can be assured that I will continue to do all that I can to move this issue forward.
Question 8, John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the planning decision on the proposed development of a golf course at Cool Links will be announced.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, we are giving full consideration to the reporter's report and recommendation which we received on the 27th of November, and a decision will be issued as soon as possible.
John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for that response. Given the proposed development could potentially affect a European protected site and the decision could be made after the UK has exited the European Union, can the Minister advise what environmental governance arrangements, I do beg your pardon, will be in place to provide oversight of decisions like this one and ensure environmental standards will be upheld?
Minister.
Presiding officer, I have to be very careful in what I say. As Mr Finney well knows, this is still a live planning application. But let me say that in general, Ramsar sites have been protected through the co-designation with other regimes since Ramsar sites were first designated in Scotland. Scottish Government policy on Ramsar sites was established in the year 2000, and it is Scottish Government policy that Ramsar sites be treated in the same manner as Natura sites, Natura sites being special areas of conservation and special protection areas, which are designated under the European Habitats and Birds Directive. Whilst variations in the expression of the policy over the years necessitated the publication of guidance earlier this year, this policy has not changed.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions, and we'll shortly move on to the next item of business.
The next item of business is a statement by Michael Matheson on rail update. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Michael Matheson for 10 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to take this opportunity to update Parliament on the ScotRail franchise contract. The benefits that our railways bring are well rehearsed. They help our economy grow. They connect our cities and our communities with jobs, education, health services and leisure activities. They enable our visitors to explore all that Scotland has to offer. And they help reduce the impact on our environment of moving people and goods. Our commitment to investing in rail is unquestionable. We have spent over £8 billion since 2007, and we will spend over £5 billion between 2019 and 2024. This investment is delivering new services and new and refurbished trains and infrastructure improvements that will increase capacity and improve reliability. Since last weekend, growing communities in the north of Glasgow have had access to the new station at Rob Royston. The December 2019 timetable change, which happened during this week, has resulted in an additional 10,000 seats on the network every day, meaning extra carriages on our Edinburgh to Glasgow routes and on our busy peak time Fife and Borders services, and additional services in the North East to maximise the benefits of our infrastructure investment. And since the start of the franchise in 2015, we have increased capacity by around 125,000 seats per day across the network. It's therefore vital that as we make those considerable investments, we do so in a way which ensures best value both for passengers and for taxpayers. The current ScotRail franchise contract commenced in 2015. As required under the current legislative framework, the Scottish Government let the contract through open commercial competition. Under the terms of the contract, in its fifth year, both the Scottish Government and Abellio ScotRail must revisit costs and revenue assumptions. Those assumptions provided the basis for the franchise subsidy levels set at the start of the contract in 2015, and we must consider whether they should be revised. This is referred to as the rebasing process. In this process, the Scottish Government and Abellio ScotRail could agree to rebase and continue with the contract until March 2025 on the basis of revised revenue and cost inputs that would determine future franchise subsidy levels. Alternatively, either party could issue a no rebasing notice, which means that the revenue and cost assumptions which determine subsidy levels remain as they are, and the contract comes to an end at an earlier point, which would be expected to be March 2022. The rebasing process commenced on the 1st of October this year, and a decision on whether to serve a no rebasing notice is required by no later than the 31st of December. My officials have undertaken extensive and rigorous analysis of the information provided by Abellio ScotRail about the rebasing option and commercial issues concerning a 10-year franchise term. As well as considering the effects on passengers, there has been a detailed and thorough analysis of the key financial, legal, economic and operational aspects. Of critical importance to measure the information provided against the policy principles that underpin the franchise, which include value for money, passenger satisfaction and fully exploiting the utility and capacity of the rail network. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the team at Abellio ScotRail for the proposal they have made and the wide range of information they have provided in support, which has allowed me to consider the range of issues that are pertinent to the rebasing decision. After careful consideration, Scottish ministers have decided not to rebase the contract. We are not satisfied that the significant increase in public subsidy that would otherwise be required would generate commensurate benefits for passengers, communities and the economy. As such, we do not consider that rebasing would secure the delivery of the policy objectives that underpin the current franchise. I can confirm that I have today issued a notice to inform Abellio ScotRail of the decision. Therefore, the current franchise agreement is expected to come to an end in March 2022. The existing provisions within the franchise agreement continue as they are set out in the contract, and we will be working closely with Abellio ScotRail to ensure the delivery of the requirements of the franchise, including performance and service quality. We will also ensure that we maximise the benefits of our significant investment in our railways in order to provide the best possible services for passengers and to support growth. There have been both successes and challenges over the first 5 years of the franchise, and we have maintained a good working relationship with Abellio ScotRail throughout that period. I fully expect that this will continue for the remainder of the contract and that they will support us in the delivery of our ambitious programme of transformation on Scotland's railways. Presiding Officer, I believe that the decision I've advised the Parliament of today in respect of the ScotRail franchise is the right one for passengers, communities, the economy and for taxpayers. It is, of course, necessary to plan for the future and future provision of ScotRail services. And I can confirm that work has already been undertaken to examine the options open to Scottish ministers after the current contract comes to an end. This will, of course, mean regular engagement with trade unions and with other stakeholders. Looking further ahead, I fully expect that changes to the structure of railways, not just in Scotland, but across the whole of the UK will take place as a consequence of the UK Rail Review undertaken by Keith Williams. While we await the outcome of the review, I very much hope it will see an end to the present complex and costly franchising system for rail services. Presiding Officer, for now, services will, of course, continue to operate. Abellio ScotRail remain contractually committed to delivering quality rail services. This government has made significant investment in our railways, and we will ensure that we maximise the benefits for passengers and for taxpayers. And I want to conclude by recognising the role of ScotRail staff, their continued hard work and commitment to delivering Scotland's essential services to the people of Scotland. Thank you.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement, and I intend to allow around 20 minutes for that. There's already a lot of indication of people wishing to ask questions. I would ask everyone to be as concise as possible and to make sure, if you do wish to ask a question, to press your request to speak button. I first of all call Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by paying tribute to the thousands of people who work on Scotland's railway, many of whom will be watching this statement, given that they were given no formal notice in advance of today and will be learning of this decision as it is being made by the Cabinet Secretary. Can I ask a number of questions which today's statement raises? The first, what engagement did the Government have with the current operator in advance of today in coming to this decision? Leading on from that, what analysis has been undertaken as to the consequences of the decision to terminate the contract early, specifically in terms of potential job losses? If the decision taken today will have any effect on services currently provided by Abellio, what analysis, Cabinet Secretary, has been done on the effect this decision will have on current and future investment plans for Scotland's railway between now and 2022? But the most important question today the public will rightfully be asking us is who will be running their railway post-2022? Nothing in today's statement gave any insight as to what the Government's plans are, other than examine options. Cabinet Secretary, surely you should have examined options before terminating the existing contract. Today's statement answers one question, but raises plenty more. The public rightfully will be concerned and surely deserves answers.
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, can I say, just given the initial comment that Jamie Green made in relation to the hundreds of thousands of staff that work with the ScotRail and giving no advance notice of this announcement, my responsibility is to report it first to the Parliament. And that's exactly what I've done. Had I not done so, I suspect you would have been on your feet demanding answers as to why it was in the public domain before I'd come in here and made a statement to Parliament. So that's the reality of the situation, in making sure that Parliament is informed of these matters. The member asked the question about what engagement is undertaken by been taken with Abellio ScotRail in regard to this decision. As I've just set out in my statement, Abellio ScotRail made a submission to the Scottish Government through Transport Scotland for the rebasing proposal. That has undergone very rigorous, detailed analysis in order to come to this particular decision around rebasing. This is a requirement within the franchise agreement to undertake the rebasing exercise. It has to be undertaken. There are no two ways about it. And that's what has been undertaken, a very detailed analysis of the proposal that's been put to us by Abellio ScotRail. So I can assure the member it's been a very thorough and detailed one. The member then asked about the consequences for potential jobs within Abellio ScotRail. As it stands, the contract we would expect to continue for the remaining 2 years. As has been the case in previous contracts, staff transfer to any new operator that takes over a new franchise, as was the case back in 2015. But one of the things that we have in our franchise agreement, which is not something which the Department of Transport pursue with franchise agreements down south, is that there is a no compulsory redundancy provision within our franchise agreement, and that remains to be in place. and is a commitment that continues to be applied to Abellio ScotRail. The member made, and I'll take the two remaining points in relation to current services and future investments. Let me just say, current services will continue as they stand at the present moment, because the contract we would expect to be in place for the remaining 2 years. And in terms of investment, we're making record investment into rail in Scotland over the course of Control Period 6, and that will continue as normal. Services will continue to be delivered, projects will continue to be provided, and we will continue to see the transformation of our rail services going forward. And on his very final point about looking into the future, if there is a delay in deciding on what the future of rail services in Scotland and the rest of the UK would be, it is with the UK Government, because they've been sitting on the Williams Review since the autumn of this year. They could have published it. They could have published it back in October if they had chosen to do so. They chose not to do so. We are still waiting to see what the outcome of that is. Once we know what the outcome of that is, we'll have a better idea about what the scope will be we'll have here in Scotland to shape rail services in a way that reflects the needs of the Scottish people and the needs of the Scottish rail network.
Colin Smyth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for the advance sight of his statement. Presiding Officer, since the start of this franchise, Abellio have failed to deliver for Scotland's hard-pressed passengers who have suffered delays, overcrowding, cancellations and fare hikes. Abellio have failed to meet their basic contractual requirements. They've breached the franchise on punctuality, cancellations and passenger satisfaction, and they have let down the hard-working ScotRail staff. So I'm glad that the Scottish Government are finally backing my calls and Scottish Labour's calls time and time again to end this failing franchise. Now, I know part of that failure is a fragmented privatised railway system that should also end, and we await the outcome of the Williams Review to consider the exact nature of any contract that replaces the Abellio franchise. But can the Cabinet Secretary give a guarantee today that the Scottish Government will ensure that a public sector operator will be properly prepared and in a position to take on that contract so Scotland's railways can at last start to put passengers and not profits first?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, can I thank the member for his comments. I did say to Jamie Green that in considering the rebasing proposal put to us by ScotRail, we did have a very detailed, thorough analysis of their submission. I can confirm, though, Mr Smyth, that your personal views on this issue did not factor into that assessment. It was purely based upon the rebasing process in itself. What I can say, though, to the member's second point in relation to the public sector bid, Mr Smyth doesn't seem to wish to acknowledge or recognise is that our hands are tied at the present moment, and our only option is to have a franchise bid for rail services in Scotland. What we have is the scope for a public sector body to be able to bid for a franchise agreement against other parties who are bidding for any franchise that is let by the Scottish Government. Now, he may be quite happy to continue with franchising. I'm certainly not. I want to get rid of franchising so that we can actually have a public sector service in Scotland that reflects the needs of the people of Scotland, as I've previously stated in this chamber. So I can assure the member that we'll be doing everything we can to make sure that we get the powers here in Scotland to determine what the future shape of Scotland's railways will be. And I very much hope that we'll get the support of the Labour Party in demanding that from the new Conservative Government, that all powers over rail should be devolved to this Parliament so we can reflect them in a way that reflects the needs of the Scottish rail network.
We'll move to open questions, and I do have a lot of requests. John Finney to be followed by Mike Rumbles.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement and warmly welcome the end of the franchise, and more on the fact that we can't go straight to nationalisation, and hope that the Labour Party and others will call for the full devolution. It's important that trade unions are involved going ahead, Cabinet Secretary, and I hear what you say about franchising. That is the view we would want to go straight. But if franchising exists, will you assure us that you'll put a robust public sector bid together with no expansion of driver-only operations, and will you rule out following the hard-right UK Government's punitive employment proposals and guarantee that Scotland's rail workers have the full range of workplace rights, including the right to withdraw their labour?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, on the member's latter point, yes, I am aware of the concerns that have been raised, in particular in relation to the proposed changes that the UK Government are suggesting that should be introduced, the legislative changes in order to curb the rights of transport workers and be able to take industrial action. I completely oppose that type of approach. The best way in which you deal with industrial relations matters is to nurture and culture positive industrial relations rather than resorting to legislative changes in this way in a punitive approach that the UK Government are intending to take. So I can assure the member that's not something which is in our thinking or the approach that we will take. Yes, of course, there will be a robust public sector bid if we are confined to nothing other than a public sector bid for a franchise. But I am conscious that that's a costly exercise for a public sector organisation. That could cost it some £10 million, and it is bidding against potentially other parties as well, which is why we need to get rid of franchising for rail services. It's costly, it's complex, and it does not serve the public well, which is why we need to have all the powers over rail here in this Parliament to determine the way and shape of our rail services going forward. So I can give the member an assurance on both the points which he's made.
Mike Rumbles, followed by Willie Coffey.
Well, this is very good news indeed, and I very much welcome the decision to end Abellio ScotRail's contract. It is something the Liberal Democrats have been calling for, and he's done it, the Minister has done it at the earliest practical opportunity, and I congratulate him for making that very wise decision. But my question focuses on what action will the Government now take to make sure that there is stronger protection for customers in the future contract, and will it provide more break points in the new contract to ensure that there's a better chance to correct poor performance? That's what we're concerned about, poor performance earlier on in a new contract.
Michael Matheson.
I'm grateful to the comments from Mike Rumbles in this matter. I think the member has touched upon a very important issue. First of all, I don't want to start speculating about any future contract on the basis that I'm hoping that if what I've heard that the Williams Review contains, that this could be the end of franchising of this nature. And therefore, there may be an opportunity for us to look at arranging rail services in a fundamentally different way, which can help to address some of the very issues that the member has highlighted. But I think he's also touched upon something which is much more fundamental in our rail services. So, for example, if we look at the way in which the regulatory function operates through the ORR, I think at times it is too slow at picking up poor performances in rail infrastructure and TOC operations, and in taking proactive action to address these matters in a way. So I think the regulatory function needs to change to get much more passenger focused and improving services for passengers. Equally, alongside that, there is a need to see greater alignment between infrastructure and passenger services. Too often, infrastructure is dealt with as in it's the heavy rail industry aspects of it. It is not passenger focused enough as well, and there's a need for it to be aligned, much more aligned in a way so they are much more passenger focused. And I hope, given the discussions I had with Keith Williams, given what I've heard are the key issues apparently have been set out for the UK Government to consider taking forward within the Williams Review, which I hope they do take forward. It's a political decision in the end, but if they do, could fundamentally allow us to change things in such a way that addresses the very issues that the members make in reference to be much more passenger focused and to align these types of issues much more effectively. And I'm certainly prepared to work within members across the chamber to try and seek to do that, should the powers be devolved to this Parliament to allow us to do that.
Can I say, Cabinet Secretary, I know your answers are fulsome and probably appreciated, but they're rather long and it is going to cut out some questions. Could bear that in mind. We have Willie Coffey, followed by Liam Kerr.
Thank you. Can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement? He will be aware of my continuing interest in supporting the improvement of rail services from Kilmarnock and Ayrshire as a whole to Glasgow and Edinburgh. And his recent visit to Kilmarnock to meet with industry representatives also highlighted the potential that electrification would bring for that local economy. Could you give me some indication as to how he sees that now moving forward, given his announcement today?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I'm aware of Willie Coffey's particular interest, given that both Wabtec and Brodie's have a base in his constituency, which I had the pleasure of visiting fairly recently. As we have set out within our programme for government, our ambition to see our rail network being decarbonised, a key part of that will be greater electrification. And what we will do is we'll set out in the next couple of months our plans for how we intend to go about that. That will include looking at the electrification of a range of different parts of the existing network. I can't give a commitment specifically to Kilmarnock at the present moment in the way in which the member is seeking, but what I can assure him is that our plans for infrastructure investment will continue, given the record investment we've set out in the Control Period 6.
Liam Kerr, followed by Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Performance concerns have many causes, such as 40% of cancellations are caused by tracker signalling, 10% caused by non-ScotRail operators, 20% caused by weather or circumstances outside of control, or passenger incidents. This decision doesn't begin to address any of these, and if anything, it makes it worse. Isn't it really the case, Presiding Officer, that what is really happening here is that the franchisee is a convenient scapegoat for the SNP's failure to understand the challenges of running a railway, and this decision sets up any future franchisee or operator for failure?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, that is a bit rich from the Conservative Party. Week in, week out, they come in here slagging off ScotRail, time and time again, demanding better services. Every time I raise the fact that the vast majority of delays and cancellations on the network in Scotland are caused by infrastructure issues that are the responsibility of Network Rail, that is the responsibility of the UK Government, they boo me and say it's just an excuse to cover for ScotRail. Now they're trying to defend them as well. At least be consistent in the matter if you're going to stand up and make any comment about rail services in Scotland. But the real answer to Mr Kerr's question here is whether his government are going to be committed to the recommendations that Keith Williams has made in his review. Because ultimately, his review will be a political decision on whether there should be a fundamental change in the way in which our rail service is operating. Getting rid of franchising, allowing different models for the provision of rail services, making sure that we align infrastructure, just in the way in which he mentioned, infrastructure and passenger services are much more aligned in order to be much more passenger focused. And if that is the case, then we'll be in a position to be able to make those decisions here in this Parliament. So I hope in recognising what the challenges are with the infrastructure challenges we have within the Scottish route, that he will be prepared to recognise that they should become the responsibility of this Parliament, and we should be able to align them in such a way with our passenger services that improves passenger satisfaction levels overall. I hope he will be big enough to do that. Time will tell and see where he actually is.
Jenny Gilruth, followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide any further detail on whether his decision has implications for the current Abellio contract between now and 2022?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, the existing franchise agreement and the content of the contract continues to be in place, and Abellio can continue to be held to account with the various levers that we have within the contract in order to hold them to account for any areas where we've got concerns or where they may be failing.
Jackie Bailey, followed by Stuart McMillan.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the early Christmas present to the hard-pressed commuters in my area and welcome his recognition of Scottish Labour's campaign highlighting the myriad problems with the rail service. Commuters in Helensburgh, Balloch and Dumbarton experiencing delays, cancellations, stop-skipping and short-form trains with passengers crammed in like sardines. But these problems continue today. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell me what assurances he will give to my constituents about the level of service they will receive from now until March 2022, when the Abellio contract finally comes to an end?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I'm very pleased to give Jackie Bailey's constituents an early Christmas present, if that's how she views the matter. Can I say this is purely a decision which is made on the rebasing requirement within the franchise agreement in itself. What I can say to the member, I recognise the concerns and issues that the members had around services within her area, part of which are addressed through the Donovan review, where work is still being progressed and that's been monitored independently in order to ensure that continued progress has been made with that. I'm sure the member, despite the problems that continue to be in the network, she will recognise that there have been improvements made in terms of addressing a range of various issues on the network, which certainly has been the case that have been provided as a result of the Donovan review. And alongside that, the remedial plan which we'll put in place for improvements that ScotRail have to take forward as well. Equally, there are measures that Network Rail need to undertake as well in improving reliability. I know there have been particular issues on the line to Dumbarton which have failed on a number of occasions, and we need to make sure that Network Rail are doing everything they can to minimise these type of recurring problems taking place on the route into Dumbarton or in any other part of the Scottish network. So all of the provisions which are in the franchise agreement at the present moment continue to be there. They will continue to be enforced. We will continue to work with Abellio, ScotRail in making sure that they're held to account for these matters, and I can assure her that we'll continue to give focus on making sure that they address concerns where they're raised about passenger services.
Stuart McMillan, followed by Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned the UK Rail Review, and how will he take this into consideration for the future of rail services when it's eventually published?
Michael Matheson.
So we had been hoping to have the outcome of the UK Rail Review in the autumn of this year. It was anticipated possibly in October. It was delayed by the UK Government. We still await the outcome from that. I've had very positive engagement with Keith Williams on a number of occasions. He recognises the very specific demands that we have here in Scotland, and I was always very welcoming of his sympathetic approach to the issues for the Scottish rail network. I hope that politically the UK Government will make the right decision now and will allow us to have the range of powers in Scotland, the running of rail services, that allow us to look at a variety of different models for how rail services are provided. And I would hope that they would publish that review and the outcomes of that review in the next coming few weeks.
If Rachel Hamilton's quick, I'll manage to get John Mason in. Rachel
Thank you,
Hamilton.
Presiding Officer. In October of this year, Dominic Booth, Managing Director of Abellio UK, said Scotland's railway needs stability and not the upheaval a change in the franchise would bring about. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain why bringing in what is effectively a break clause will not lead to further uncertainty for passengers on the Borders Rail and across Scotland, as well as the hard-working staff and job security?
Michael Matheson.
Well, Presiding Officer, I hope the member will welcome the significant improvement that has been in border rail services, including increasing capacity being provided as part of the December timetable change. I should point out to the member, as I said in my statement, this is part of the rebasing process that is set out within the franchise agreement. The issue about the debate earlier this year was very much about just ending the franchise, and that's it. This is about the rebasing process, which is a very technical, detailed process that's been undertaken with a very detailed analysis being carried through. So it comes as no surprise to Abellio ScotRail. They submitted a rebasing notice to us, and we've made an assessment of that. And that's why we have come to the decision, based upon the significant cost increase that would be associated with that. We do not believe that that would be commensurate with improving services for passengers, given the additional cost it would have to taxpayers. But I certainly will be looking to work with Dominic Booth and his colleagues at Abellio ScotRail over the course of the next 2 years to make sure that we maximise the benefits of the existing franchise while they remain part of it.
John Mason.
Very much. In recent years, Cabinet Secretary, there have been huge improvements in the rail service, certainly between Glasgow and Edinburgh. We now have 5 electrified lines. We have the 385s, which I think are tremendous trains, and there's more seats, and there's less overcrowding than there used to be. Will all of these improvements carry on, whatever happens?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, all of those commitments that were set out as part of our plan for investment in this franchise and also for infrastructure investments will continue as part of the franchise as we go forward, and also in Control Period 6. So I can give the member that assurance. We want to build on the very significant improvements we saw in rail over the course of the last decade or so, and to make sure that we continue to build on that in the years to come.
I can squeeze in a quick question from Claire Baker.
Thank you. I very much welcome the announcement today, but as we enter the severe winter period and the contract will last until 2022 and my constituents are about to face a price hike in the cost of their fares, what guarantees can I give them that they will no longer continue to have to put up with a substandard service?
And a quick answer from the Cabinet Secretary,
Well,
please.
Presiding Officer, the member will be aware that we have put a remedial plan specifically in place to address concerns and issues about performance within the Fife Circle area, and as a result of that, we have saw marked improvements, reductions reductions in cancellations, improvement in punctuality, and also increasing seat capacity as well, which has actually additionally just come in as a course of the December timetable change. There is certainly more to do, because some of the real benefits we want to see being delivered within the Fife Circle area are dependent on the HSTs being delivered by Wabtec and by Angel Trains, which will increase capacity even further. And I would hope, as we go forward into the May timetable, that we will see further improvements as a result of increasing capacity on the Fife Circle.
That concludes questions on the statement on the rail update. I'm sorry I wasn't able to reach Rona Mackay or Neil Findlay, and we'll move on to the next item of business. The next item of business is a statement by Derek Mackay on Ferguson Marine update. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Derek Mackay for up to 10 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm grateful for the opportunity today to provide Parliament with an update on Ferguson Marine Shipyard in Inverclyde. Scottish Government has been working for 2 years to support a commercial solution for the future of the business and its workforce. We're committed to securing a future for commercial shipbuilding on the Clyde and are proud of the steps that we've taken to save Ferguson Marine. In August, as a result of the extensive cost and time overruns, the 2 ferries under construction and severe cash flow limitations, the directors of Ferguson Marine Engineering Limited gave notice of their intention to put the business into administration. In order to remove the threat of closure, Scottish ministers took control of the yard. This action avoided a lengthy administration that would have created further uncertainty for the workforce, further delays for those communities awaiting delivery of the vessels, and protected the value of the loan Scottish Government had provided to the business. We immediately took steps to stabilise the business and get the delivery of the ferries back on track. We completed the commercial transaction on Monday, the 2nd of December, establishing the new business under the name of Ferguson Marine Port Glasgow Limited, as a company wholly owned by Scottish ministers. Shipbuilding in Scotland is a proud part of our nation's history, and this government was not prepared to see the expertise and the skills established over more than a century disappear into insolvency. As a result of our actions, we've ensured that shipbuilding on the Lower Clyde will be part of our nation's future. My priorities for Ferguson Marine remain the same as I set out to Parliament in my statement on the 3rd of September. To protect jobs at the yard, to deliver much-needed new ferries, and to secure a future for Ferguson Marine and commercial shipbuilding on the Clyde. The alternative for the Scottish Government was to walk away, resulting in hundreds of job losses, the yard's closure and our vital ferries not being finished, and I was not willing to walk away. I published today a suite of documents which details the Scottish Government's engagement with Ferguson Marine since the award of the ferries contract in 2015 until the business entered administration in August, and our commitment to a successful outcome. These papers tell the story of the significant issues under the previous management and the steadfast position of the Scottish Government acting in good faith at all times to secure the future of the yard. The contract for the ferries anticipated delivery in mid-2018. The customer, CMAL, had personnel in the yard throughout the build and first highlighted concerns in November 2016. Scottish ministers encouraged CMAL and FML to work together and made every possible effort to find a solution to FML's problems, including the possibility of mediation, the provision of commercial loans and the input of a range of expert external advisers, often in response to requests from FML as they raise concerns regarding the contract for the project. Concerns about progress on the vessels were raised at various points, and the advice we received on these from FML and CBC, as well as a number of advisers, including independent advisers appointed specifically to provide assurance on progress, was conflicting. The lack of clarity and progress of the vessels on design changes and the prospect of litigation by FML under the contracts has hindered the project throughout. The Government consistently acted in good faith on the best information available to us, and unfortunately, despite our best efforts, the problems incurred by the yard in delivering the design and build contract for 801 and 802 could not be resolved. The full picture was not revealed until the new management team had control of the yard. We appointed Tim Hare as turnaround director on the 16th of August. His mission was to stabilise the business and to put in place a programme to complete the 2 ferries. A programme review board of key stakeholders was established to oversee this work and provide guidance. So I received the final report on the 13th of December, and copies are available at the rear of the chamber. The report published today sets out in stark detail the failings of the previous management, and it's difficult to overemphasise the disastrous impact of the absence of proper management processes had on the yard. This had implications for the condition and progress of the ferries being constructed there and the scale of the challenge that lies ahead to put right the failures of the previous management team. And I would like to thank both the employees and the new management team who have worked so hard to deliver this report. The skill, commitment and quality of the workforce has never been in question. The new management team is focused on delivering key management practices to implement new and robust processes which will better meet the needs of the business and provide greater control. And this will ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. The challenges of the new management team have included the failure to implement a sound management information system on which to base any assessment of progress to date, critical issues with both the design process for the vessels and the approvals process for that design. The design programme for the vessels, which was the responsibility of FML as part of a design and build contract, is several years behind. Getting this back on schedule will be a key area of work going forward. Project planning was largely absent, resulting in out-of-sequence and often abortive work. Controls and subcontracted resource and materials were lacking, quality control through the build-out process was largely absent, and the vessels have not been maintained in the condition that we would expect. So, of course, it's of significant concern to me that the advisers placed in the yard to report to the Scottish Government couldn't pinpoint the full extent of these issues while the previous management were in place. Since we've taken control of the yard, significant progress has been made in reorganising the yard. Significant work is also underway to address the known defects and to take remedial action to ensure that the steel in the vessels receives the necessary paint protection. Further information is required to fully understand the implications for delivery of the vessels, including the full extent of rework required across the vessels, the condition of the underside of vessel 801, which will need to be inspected in dry dock, and the ability to successfully commission equipment where warranties have expired. This is not an exhaustive list, but I hope it provides a sense of the scale of the challenge involved. So the contracts for the vessels had a value of £97 million, and a further £1.5 million increase had been agreed through the proper mechanisms in the contract. £83 million, which was paid out to FML. So the failures of management, planning and process mean that the vessels are behind their original programme and that significant rework is required. So as a result, we expect further costs, including the £15 million outstanding of the £32.8 million for vessel 801 and £45.9 million for vessel 802. So this includes an allowance of £12.8 million for rework and remediation, which will be undertaken in the period to May 2020. In addition to this, a further £31.6 million will be required for overheads, such as yard running costs, consumables and personnel that would be included in the contract price. As a result of the additional cost to complete the vessels beyond the contract price and to improve the management and operation of the yard, in order to do so, will be £94.8 million. Now, although the PRB report indicates this could increase to £98.8 million if certain risks materialise. So all of these additional costs result directly from the delay and poor management of the previous management team. This is based on the estimated delivery window of October to December 2021 for 801 and a window of July to October 2022 for 802. Transport Scotland will work with CalMac and key stakeholders to mitigate the impacts that the delay to the ferries will involve, including the Ferries Resilience Fund of £4 million to improve the resilience of the fleet. And we'll also continue to take forward a comprehensive review of the needs of the ferry network, developing a future pipeline of vessels required to service our island communities and explore the role that Ferguson's can play in meeting those needs. Public ownership of the yard will allow us to ensure that the ferries are completed and provide the workforce with security. And we're already seeing progress. 68 new staff members have been recruited to support the yard's work, and the detailed understanding we now have of what it will take to complete the ferries is a significant step forward. Sound governance will be important to ensuring the stability of the business and a clear sense of commercial direction going forward. A board and a chairperson will be appointed in the coming months, with members selected to ensure that the business benefits from the direction of people with skills and expertise and experience to support its success. Bringing the yard into public ownership was the only viable option to achieve our goals of delivering the vessels, safeguarding the jobs and giving a future to the yard. It was and is the right thing to do, and I'm proud of the progress that has been made since the Scottish Government took control of the business on the 16th of August. We now have a team approach to work together to complete the vessels, safeguard the jobs and give a future to the yard. That has been our guiding mission throughout, and we will deliver.
The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in the statement and will allow around 20 minutes for that. Would those who wish to ask a question please press the request to speak buttons. Thank you very much. I call Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of the statement? This information was promised to Parliament by the end of October and conveniently buried until after the election. And hearing the Cabinet Secretary, now I know why. The ongoing saga, Presiding Officer, of these new Camac ferries is one which should come as a great source of shame to the SNP and all of its members. It is an abject failure to deliver to our island communities new ferries on time or on budget, as today's statement confirms. Beleaguered shipyard workers had their business put into administration as a direct result of the actions of this Scottish Government. The Cabinet Secretary, with no hint of irony, wants us to praise him for saving the yard which his own government put at risk of closure in the first place. It is shocking, Presiding Officer. These ferries were expected in 2018 and both were due to cost £98 million. But today we learn these ferries will cost at least £200 million and be at least 3.5 years late. He's quick to blame the management team at the yard, which begs the question, what government oversight was taking place during this phase? Let me ask, Cabinet Secretary, what role did CMAL have in the demise of the yard in the first place? Where were they during these so-called failures that you speak of? And after the yard went into administration, what offers were received for it? And on what grounds were they rejected, given that the Scottish Government was the largest creditor in this process? How much money paid by the Government to loans, as loans to the yard, has been written off by the Government? What the Cabinet Secretary thinks the total cost to the taxpayer for these two ferries will be? Does he think that's value for money? And how many ferries could that have paid for? And finally, Cabinet Secretary, can you advise the Chamber what happened to the other commercial work on the yard's order books, given that the yard is now state-owned?
Derek Mackay.
I would just simply say I think it's astounding for a Conservative to talk about shame in shipbuilding. It was a Conservative that destroyed shipbuilding in Scotland and many other industries where this Government has intervened. But let me say, if it wasn't for the actions of the Scottish Government, Ferguson's would not have a tomorrow. It's the actions we've taken to date that will ensure that Ferguson's has a future, and that's the important point here. In a perfect world, it would have been better if Ferguson's was just able to deliver the two ferries that we paid them for. That contract, design and build contract, a fixed price contract of £97 million. I'm sorry to say that the previous management has failed, and that's why we're in the position that we're in today. Let's look at what happened in Harland and Wolff, a shipyard elsewhere. What did the UK Government do when that shipyard went into administration? Nothing. Mr Green asked me a question about the workforce. I'll tell you, the workforce appreciate that it was the SNP that saved the shipyard, saved their jobs and ensured continuity of employment, and the workers didn't lose a single penny because of the orderly process that we undertook. Mr Green asked me why other bids post-administration were rejected. That's a matter for the administrators. Does Mr Green not even understand the process of administration? And we, of course, put forward the best bid. I've outlined the additional costs. And of course it's regrettable that we will have to pay more money, but the alternative is to walk away, close the yard, lose the jobs and not complete the vessels. And when it comes to the Conservatives saying to me, isn't it terrible the vessels are going to be late, there wouldn't be any vessels because the Tories vote against their budgets that are paying for the vessels in the first place. In terms of independent analysis and oversight, we got conflicting reports. There was a poor relationship between CMAL and FML. I think that's perfectly well understood. And we didn't just leave it to either side's opinion. We had independent experts look at it as well, and then we got further conflicting advice. So whatever action we have taken, and that's why I've published so much information today, when you look in the cold light of day, the information that we have had, with our guiding mission, we have done the right thing throughout, and that is why I've been so open, so transparent and so clear in the mission that we have set out. And in terms of the loans, yes, we had committed £45 million worth of loans to support the business. We were being called upon to support FML and support the business around working capital and diversification, and that's what we've done. And actually, the loans is what put us in a very strong position in terms of being able to take public control and then ultimately ownership of the yard. The Conservatives have a choice here. Do they want to support us in rejuvenating commercial shipbuilding in the Clyde? Yes or no? But I fear, unlike the actions of this government, they just want to play politics with people's lives, whereas we have saved jobs and we will deliver these vessels.
Can I have a bit of quiet here? Can I just say that's only one question, it's over 5 minutes. The problem, excuse me, I'm speaking at the moment, I don't wish to be interrupted. Can I say there's an issue on both sides here? Far too many questions to be given in a 1.5 minute slot, and far too long in answers as well, Cabinet Secretary, when it comes to it. That's going to have a direct effect on backbenchers, as has the time I am taking to explain this. Rhoda Grant.
This statement lays bare the disastrous mismanagement of this contract. A contract that has now doubled in price and is 4 years late. The Scottish Government appear to be passing the buck, but they have responsibility for how taxpayers' money is spent. And while they have dithered and mismanaged, the people in Arran, Uist and Harris are now left with inadequate ferry services and no reprieve in sight. And the workforce at Ferguson's have faced uncertainty about their future. We support the Scottish Government taking the yard into public ownership in order to rescue these jobs and vessels. However, it should have never come to this. Can I ask what legal action the Scottish Government is taking, given their alleged failures of the previous management to recoup the costs? And in the interim, will they lease additional vessels to ensure sustainability in the Calmac routes affected? And will he take this opportunity to apologise to the workers and communities that they have so badly let down?
Derek Mackay.
Well, I have to say I have visited the workers and I was applauded by the workers, so I don't think they're looking for an apology from me. They're probably looking for an apology from those who choose to play political games with Ferguson's, when our mission throughout was to try and deliver a contract. Let's be clear, it's just like I've heard, what has Abellio got to do with the railways and who's responsible for delivering the railways? In this regard, it was FML who was delivering a design and build contract. Unfortunately, they have failed, and in their failure, the government has intervened. That Rhoda Grant said she welcomed the government's intervention. I didn't hear a simple or single suggestion as to what we could have done differently. At every stage of the way, we were intensively involved to try and ensure that a resolution could be found. But we have to deliver value for money, act within the law, and act in good faith, and that's what we've done. Now, when I publish the information that I've committed to publish today, I invite the Labour Party to read through that and say, what would you have done differently? And just the same as the Conservatives, the Labour Party hasn't supported any of my budgets, which has actually paid for these vessels in the first place. So when the new vessels are complete, it will be no thanks to the Labour Party.
We move to the open questions. I'll have Maureen Watt, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister agree that, sadly, many of the issues faced by the yard were as a result of Ferguson Marine's failure to recruit enough professionals with the right technical expertise and know-how to undertake the building of these vessels?
Derek Mackay.
Yeah, I mean, I heard also the Conservatives complain about what they thought was my opinion, but the information I've given on the failure at the yard isn't my opinion. It's actually the view of the turnaround director, Tim Hare, who's presented what he has found at the yard and the plan for the remedies going forward. So yes, there was an issue about capability of management and leadership at the yard. Yes, that needs to be addressed, and we're getting on with addressing that, and that's why I have a turnaround director, and I've brought a programme review board together to achieve that outcome.
John Finney, followed by Mike Rumbles.
Presiding officer, the Scottish Government are to be applauded for their intervention here. The phrase that constituents will have picked up as the estimated delivery window. Now, I acknowledge the £4 million resilience fund that you referred to. The baseline for all our discussions on this is the ferry replacement plan, and you've referred to that as a pipeline approach. Well, that pipeline is, of course, blocked at the moment, Cabinet Secretary. Looking forward, are you able to say when that blockage will be removed and the estimated delivery window for the third next vessel that's due, which is mighty long due as well?
Derek Mackay.
Well, I'll make two brief points. First of all, I've touched on it in my statement. I think we should now look very closely at a future pipeline of work for further vessels. And in terms of the second point around the Isla vessel, I know that the Minister responsible for ferries, Paul Wheelhouse, would be happy to pick that up. But my point is this: see if we get it right and we can turn around the fortunes of Ferguson. Essentially, we may well have an opportunity to place further work, and that will be very welcome indeed in terms of a really robust future pipeline of vessel replacement and investment going forward long into the future.
Mike Rumbles, followed by Stuart McMillan.
I'm afraid the original placing of the orders for the two new vessels has now resulted in an almost doubling of their costs, with an extra £100 million for the taxpayer and a 3 to 4 year delay. Now, Cabinet Secretary blames Ferguson's management for this. He knows the detail. Could he therefore lay out exactly what due diligence was paid by the Cabinet Secretary when he lodged this contract with Ferguson's management in the first place?
Derek Mackay.
I won't be able to do that answer justice without breaching your request on being concise, Presiding Officer, but that's exactly why I've published a whole list of documents that Mike Rumbles is more than welcome to go to. I think I've been really proactive in publishing those documents, some of which could have been requested through freedom of information, but by being proactive, I'm certainly making all of that information available. Of course, due diligence was undertaken when the contract was awarded on a quality and cost basis. Of course, there was oversight throughout. There was oversight throughout. I mean, here in Murdo Fraser, so you did a very good job. I mean, remember the Conservatives awarded a ferry contract to a company with no boats over their Brexit preparation? We actually had the wisdom. We actually had the wisdom of awarding a ferries contract to an actual shipyard, which is revolutionary. But back to the point, back to the really important point. There was oversight, but we got conflicting information, and even when I sent in an independent advisor, that added to the very muddied picture as to exactly what was going on. The full extent of our knowledge of what's been going on at the yard has really only come to us when we took control of the yard, and that now equips us with the information and the intelligence to turn the yard around, to make sure that it's fighting fit into the future, and the workforce appreciate that. I've said before, this is not an issue about the workforce. It was an issue, frankly, of management and management processes.
Stuart McMillan, followed by Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the statement and also for the decisive action that he's taken thus far. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide an assurance, though, that the 2-year window provides the Scottish Government with the opportunity to plan the future pipeline of work whilst the vessels 801 and 802 actually are being completed? And will Ferguson Marine Port Glasgow Limited be the yard that will obtain these orders?
Derek Mackay.
Yes, I mean, the priority will be and sorry, it will allow me to complete a question that Jamie Green fairly asked me, that we will go on with completing the 2 vessels, of course, that the CalMac fleet are very keen, of course, to have as quickly as possible. There are other contracts, there is other work that we want to see completed as well, but that's still a matter between us and those companies. Of course, I'd want that work to be complete. And there was a lot of interest in the Babcock work, potentially, the Type 31 frigates. And in terms of the structure that we will design, it should enable Ferguson's to take work from both the public sector and the private sector, so we can optimise the opportunities that work can come from anywhere to go to Ferguson's. But we need to make sure that we restore its reputation and complete the vessels currently under construction.
Murdo Fraser, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government puts the blame for this fiasco firmly at the door of the management of Ferguson Marine for their failure to deliver on the ferry contract. But this begs the question, why in 2014 were Ferguson's deemed a suitable company to be awarded this contract, given the management was, in the Finance Secretary's own words, and I quote, disastrous? Who in the Scottish Government took the decision at that time, and will they be held to account for their actions?
Derek Mackay.
Well, as Murdo Fraser knows very well, government ministers are given recommendations from officials who have done an appropriate weighting of any bid. Ferguson's came out as the best bid, and it was on that basis on which the contract was awarded. I don't think anyone could have foreseen in 2014 that the management failures, frankly, would have been as they have been. No one foresaw that. But what we did know is that Ferguson's had a very strong workforce. It is a good place to do business, but the actual design and delivery, the design, well, that's come to light after the last few years. Mr. Fraser, I would simply say, I really do think that it would be great to have a crystal ball and to know then what we know now. But the point is, when faced with these actions and we're faced with this information, the government is taking appropriate action. Don't just take my word for it. There's independent opinion. There's been independent reviews. I'm publishing all of this information. It's not just Derek Mackay's opinion. I am informed by others, and not least the turnaround director, who had no axe to grind. No axe to grind with Ferguson's. So I know that Murdo Fraser's pulling my chain a wee bit here, but Murdo Fraser also knows that our actions have been the right thing to do.
Kenneth Gibson, followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement. I'm sure he will understand the disappointment of my Arran constituents that with sea trials it is likely to be the summer of 2022 before the Glensannox enter service on their Drogheda to Brodick route. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this will at least allow ample time to ensure that the Ardrossan Harbour redevelopment is completed prior to that, taking fully into account the needs of the Glensannox and delivering a more reliable service for the people and communities of Arran?
Derek Mackay.
I actually think there's a fair technical point there. Paul Wheelhouse, again, will be more familiar with the issues around the Ardrossan Harbour, and I believe it is making progress. But if there is a silver lining there, there is now that time to make sure that the harbour is absolutely fit for purpose for the new vessel. So there is something of a silver lining in that timescale. But Kenny Gibson, Alistair Allen and other members have been pursuing me aggressively for some time for the delivery of these vessels, because the communities they represent really want these vessels to be delivered. And I understand that, and that's also why we've invested in the Resilience Fund, so that we can support CalMac when it is under pressure, because we have pushed the fleet to the maximum capacity to try and respond to islanders' needs.
Neil Bibby, followed by John Mason.
If the workforce had been listened to earlier, then we would not be in this position. The only way that even these delayed times and costs will be kept to is if there's unity of purpose amongst the workforce, management and government. Does the Cabinet Secretary therefore agree that the workforce should not just be represented on the programme board but on the company board too? And is the Cabinet Secretary aware of the GMB's concerns over the recent use of temporary and agency workers?
Derek Mackay.
I can only say that I think I've got very strong relationships with the trade unions, and I see Neil Bibby nodding at that, because it would be it wouldn't be truthful to say otherwise. I've got a very strong relationship with the trade unions. I've put, trade union representation on the project review board, and I'm very happy to look at future structures as well. But I know what the priorities of the trade unions were here, and that was to ensure an orderly transition, continuity of employment, save the jobs and give the yard a future. And I am absolutely committed to that, and the workforce know it.
Brevity would help me get everyone in. John Mason, followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you very much. I understand there was 290 direct jobs and I think 60 contractors' jobs, but I'm not sure how many were in the supply chain. Can the Cabinet Secretary clarify just how many jobs in the local community have been saved through this?
Derek Mackay.
Well, as it stands, the current headcount based on my most recent figures was 334. That's 150 permanent, 175 temporary. There are contractors involved, that's 9. And there's recruitment going on for new employees for 33 vacancies. So more people have been employed at Ferguson's as a consequence of our action. And I was also delighted to attend the passing out parade, if you like, of the apprentices, and it was great to see them complete their apprenticeships and look forward to employment in Ferguson's.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that a significant number, potentially as many as half of Scotland ferries, are ageing and will require to be replaced in the coming years. Among these are a number of boats in Orkney and Shetland's inter-island fleet, as well as others across the Highlands and Islands, and these are vital lifeline links. So given the Scottish Government intends to explore the role that Ferguson's will play in providing vessels for the future, can the Minister give his assurance to my constituents that they can have confidence in the procurement process and they will not see a repeat of this chaos, and communities across the Highlands and Islands won't be bearing the brunt of delays?
Derek Mackay.
Well, I think the point that I'm trying to explain is that there might be a virtue in the Scottish Government owning a shipyard in terms of a future pipeline of work. Now, that's not to prejudice what might happen in the future, because my commitment's not necessarily the ownership of Ferguson's, but the fact that it has a future, we safeguard the jobs and we complete the vessels. I know the demands. I've been a transport minister. I know the demands on the ferries. I know the nature of the ageing fleet. And as I say, if we're building up the capacity to ensure there's shipbuilding in Scotland, then I think we very well could have a very robust future pipeline going forward, but not to the exclusion of potential private sector work to Ferguson's as well. So yes, I can give that assurance. We will be looking at investment into the ferry infrastructure, as we have been, having committed over £1 billion towards the ferry network over the last number of years. So we have a track record of investing in the ferry network, in the vessels, in the harbours, in the infrastructure, in road equivalent tariff, and I think it's a very strong record. I am disappointed that this design and build contract hasn't been successful, but rather than walk away, we're remedying the situation.
Quick question, please, Alistair Allen.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of how important it is to my constituents in Harris and Uist that vessel 802 in particular enters into service as soon as possible, and that both vessels relieve pressure on an ageing fleet. Given the delay, what will be done to engage with communities in Uist and Harris regarding any revised delivery date?
That wasn't very quick. Can we have a quicker answer, please, Minister?
Well, we're also straying into the Transport Minister's territory, but as I say, I have made resources available for resilience. We will engage with communities. My ongoing commitment as well is to continue to report to Parliament on the progress of the vessels, the progress that we're making, and if there's any substantial change to either the costs or the timescale that I've set out, then I'll make sure members are aware of it. And as I've already pointed out, Alistair Allen has been very enthusiastic in making sure that these vessels are delivered, which is why I know he'll be so delighted to know that we are going to finish the job.
Thank you. That concludes questions on the statement on Ferguson Marine, and we'll move on to the next item of business. The next item of business is Stage 1 debate on motion 20223 in the name of Christina McKelvey on the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. May I ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Christina McKelvey to speak to and move the motion for up to 9 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I am very pleased to open this Stage 1 debate on the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. This is an important bill which will make a real difference to women and girls at risk of or who have experienced the abhorrent practice of FGM. As members know, the Equality Human Rights Committee published a Stage 1 report earlier this month, and that report gave unanimous support for the principles of the bill. I would like to thank the convener and members of the committee for their thoughtful and considered report. We responded quickly and positively to the report on the 11th of December, and I'm sure members have now had an opportunity to read through that response. Above all, Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank those organisations and experts who took the time to provide their invaluable perspective to the committee. It's incredibly valuable to have that lived experience. Like other forms of gender-based violence, FGM is a manifestation of power and a means of controlling the sexuality of women and girls. It's a form of violence against women. As the Minister responsible for the Scottish Government's work in this area, I am committed to preventing FGM in Scotland and ensuring that girls and women who are at risk of FGM are protected from harm. FGM has been illegal since 1985. What the FGM Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill seeks to do is to add existing protections and improve the system response for women and girls at risk of harm. It is established that at least 200 million girls and women across 30 countries have been subject to FGM, and the prevalence of FGM in Scotland is difficult to estimate because of the hidden nature of the crime. A Scottish Refugee Council report in 2014 found that there are communities potentially affected by FGM in every local authority area in Scotland, with the largest communities in Glasgow, Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Dundee. So it's not a new issue, Presiding Officer, but this government has been taking action. In 2016, we published the National Action Plan to prevent and eradicate FGM in Scotland. The purpose of the National Action Plan is to foster an environment of prevention in Scotland and to improve the welfare and quality of life of FGM survivors. We are taking steps to engage with communities, raise awareness and improve the response of frontline services. And our work includes strengthening the existing legal protections at those of risk of FGM. This is what the FGM Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill does. The bill creates a new specific FGM measure, a protection order, which means our public services and our courts are able to focus on the need to protect those persons at risk or those who have already suffered from FGM being carried out on them. Building on the experience in other jurisdictions in the UK and reflecting on the support in our consultation, this is an effective and proven approach to reducing the risk to potential victims. Under the bill, the FGM protection orders will be made by a court and be unique to each case. The orders will contain conditions to protect girls and women from FGM, further and in addition to what their equivalent orders in the rest of the UK can already do. They will be able to be used by law enforcement agencies against those who wish to perpetrate this terrible crime, restricting their activities, even where no potential victim has been identified. To support the new protection order, the bill places a duty on ministers to issue statutory guidance on the protection orders and also a power to issue guidance on FGM more generally. Let me now turn to the committee's report, and that makes a number of points in their recommendations. The committee asked us to be mindful of the risk of racialisation and stigma in developing the guidance and training. I have been clear in rejecting the assertion that this bill racially profiles communities, although I do acknowledge the importance of being careful with language and the reality of stigma. The public bodies who are tasked with responding in this area are taking forward work to embed equality and diversity within their workforce, which will help to reduce that risk. We will work to ensure that guidance and training is shaped by the communities themselves and reflects the reality of FGM. Community engagement, Presiding Officer, was a very strong focus to the committee. It's absolutely critical for me. Nothing about us without us is my watchword here. So following royal assent, we will take forward a comprehensive programme of engagement with communities and stakeholders to shape that very guidance. Ensuring that support is available for women and girls who are at risk or who have experienced FGM was also identified as important within the report. We will work closely with COSLA to ensure that the clear information on the support available is included in the guidance. The third sector also has a critical role here, and we will continue to fund their work in that area. The committee notes the importance of education and links with the wider child protection system. That's absolutely correct. We are absolutely clear that FGM is a form of child abuse, and our National Child Protection Guidance for Scotland, which is being updated now to reflect this. In Scotland, in schools, the Scottish Government believes it is for teachers, schools and local authorities to determine how best to deliver learning and teaching on any topic and subject in line with Curriculum for Excellence. However, we do support our schools and teachers to deliver relevant and engaging learning. Earlier this year, we supported publication of an online teaching resource for relationships, sexual health and parenthood education. I have seen this excellent piece of work firsthand, and I would encourage all members to take a look at it. It's incredibly helpful. It includes content on FGM, which can be targeted at the early secondary school level. There is also material for the late primary school level to create the building blocks so that our young people can better understand what actually constitutes abuse. The committee considered additional provisions in the rest of the UK relating to anonymity for victims, a duty to notify, and the creation of a specific offence of failing to protect someone from FGM. I am pleased that the committee agreed with our assessment that inclusion of the duty to notify and failure to protect offence does not go into the bill. The committee did ask us to look at what more we can do around ensuring that those seeking anonymity in court can be granted it, and have undertaken to respond to that point before stage 2 arrives at the committee. Underlying so many issues we have discussed today is the need to ensure that people and communities play a central role in shaping the services, policies and statutory guidance. That is key for me as Minister. And as I've said, I am committed to taking forward a comprehensive programme of engagement and involvement as we implement this legislation. In this way, we can make sure that we do what actually helps: prevent FGM, disrupt the activities of perpetrators, provide protections to those at risk, provide the support that's required and, through participation, gives a voice to people and communities affected by this practice. Presiding Officer, the bill, alongside our action plan, therefore is the right mix of prevention and protection. I want to end my opening statement with a quote from someone called Waris Deary, a Somalian activist against FGM. She described her own terrible memory of undergoing FGM. And I quote her now: "Mama tied a blindfold over my eyes. The next thing I felt, my flesh was being cut away. I heard the blade sawing back and forth through my skin. The pain between my legs was so intense, I wished I would die." Presiding Officer, if this bill prevents just one person going through what Waris experienced, then it will be well worth it. I commend the general principles of the bill to our Parliament. Thank you.
Could you move the motion, please, Minister?
I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much. I now call on Ruth Maguire on behalf of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee for up to 7 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, over the past few months, the Equalities and Human Rights Committee heard from women's organisations, academics, midwives, educators, police and other professionals. We heard how the UK Government and agencies handle FGM and about the interaction between protection orders and asylum and immigration. But the most powerful evidence in our scrutiny of the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill came from our engagement with organisations, meeting with survivors and frontline workers. They told us the difference protection orders might make and how Scotland can better deal with and prevent FGM. I'd like to share some of their experience with the Chamber today. As part of our engagement, we worked with the outreach and engagement teams in the Parliament on a digital storytelling project. Through a series of workshops, women affected by FGM created short films of their experiences. This meant they could tell their story, their way, in a supported and safe environment. These digital stories are powerful and difficult viewing, and I urge those who want a greater understanding of FGM and the impact on women to view them. But, Presiding Officer, when we're talking about FGM, I don't particularly like the word story. It suggests fiction, it suggests a neat narrative and a happy ending. And for many of the women we met and heard from, neither of those is true. The situations where FGM is a threat can be complicated and complex. And if FGM seems far removed from those of us in the Chamber today, these digital stories show us it's a very real thing for some women in Scotland. In our evidence, we heard concerns about racialisation. We recognised those concerns and asked the Scottish Government to be mindful of this as they develop the statutory guidance around FGM. But we know from our evidence there's no one culture or community that practices FGM. It's found around the world, and it is always a fundamental violation of human rights. FGM contravenes articles in the European Convention on Human Rights relating to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment, and other human rights treaties, including the Convention Against Torture, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Presiding Officer, we are all entitled to the same human rights, but we recognise that when we try to realise them, we come from different starting points. For the women and girls facing the threat of FGM or dealing with the consequences of FGM, that starting point can seem a long way back. Through our work on human rights, we've learned the key to realising human rights is to take a person-centred approach. Put simply, as lawmakers, we must understand we all have different backgrounds and needs. For our laws to be good laws, we must put the individual at the centre and involve them in the process. The women who shared their digital stories want to be involved. They have lived experience and expertise. They must be at the centre of the work on this bill going forward. And what did women tell us they needed? At the Women's Support Project in Glasgow, Mary Fee and I heard from women about the struggles they faced finding suitable health care. One of the women said that she felt like she stood out in her hijab and was embarrassed to be there in the sexual health clinic. Women wanted to speak to someone who understood their experiences in a supportive environment. They wanted help and support to be available and not just through maternity services. We We welcome the commitment from the Scottish Government to look at this further. At the multicultural family base in Leith, Oliver Mundell and I heard about a woman who'd come to Scotland with her children and husband on a temporary visa. During their time in Scotland, they had a daughter. The family were now due to return to their home country, where the girl would face FGM. The mother didn't want this to happen. Her options were to return to her home country, where her daughter would be cut, or she could seek asylum in Scotland. Her choice becomes less of a choice the more we understand what it actually means. As an asylum seeker, she would be in Scotland with her children, but without her husband. She feared she would be disowned by her family. She would be relocated from Edinburgh to Glasgow, far from the community and connections that she'd made. She would face poverty and uncertainty in the name of protecting her child. We were asked how a protection order would help this woman. Would it assist her asylum case? Would it give her time and space to assess her options? Would it provide housing for her and her children? Answers to these questions will be key to the success of this bill. As a committee, we agree with the general principles of the bill. We welcome anything that can provide additional protection to those facing the harm of FGM, and we heard from witnesses these protection orders would do that. But from women and communities, we heard their need for support. Legislation in isolation will not stop FGM in Scotland. For this bill to work, we must look at the support women need, and we should put them at the heart of developing it. That's how we ensure this bill makes meaningful change for women and girls. Presiding Officer, I'd like to finish with a plea from one of the digital stories created by all the women together as they were reflecting on their thoughts and hopes for the bill. They told us, "Do not doubt stories about FGM. They are real. We want our thoughts and our voices to be heard in our own words. We want change, and we hope our experience can help bring this change about." On behalf of the committee, I offer my sincere thanks to all those who gave evidence, shared their experience, and helped us form our conclusions. We believe this bill is an opportunity to create a new chapter in the story. We urge the Scottish Government to ensure this is truly person-centred legislation. As the Minister told us, nothing about us without us. Make these women the leading roles, not the supporting actors. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the Equalities and Human Rights Committee supports the general principles of the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill.
And now call on Annie Wells for up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We welcome the publication of the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill and today's debate. FGM is a form of violence against women and girls, and it's a violation of their human rights. FGM describes all procedures involving partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. It's mostly carried out soon after birth or as a young girl, or occasionally it involves adult women. Because FGM is carried out at different ages, it can be difficult to identify when a girl faces an imminent risk of FGM. There are no health benefits of FGM. It's likely to cause both short-term and long-term physical and psychological harm. The procedure can cause serious injuries, including severe bleeding, problems urinating, cysts, infections, and potentially complications in childbirth. And as we've heard, more than 200 million girls and women alive today have suffered from FGM. Thankfully, the practice is far from the norm in Scotland and the UK. But we should still send a clear message about how wrong the practice is and do whatever we can to prevent it. Scotland has developed specific legislation and policy on FGM. We have a broad range of tools to help support and protect women and girls who have been subject to FGM. FGM has been a criminal offence in the UK for 34 years, since 1985. In the rest of the UK, the FGM Act 2003 repealed and reenacted the 1985 Act, and the FGM Act 2005 carried out the same functions in Scotland. The Act made it an offence to have FGM carried out abroad, and it increased the maximum penalty to 14 years imprisonment. The 2005 Act also changed the terminology from circumcision to FGM. To date, there have been no criminal prosecutions brought in Scotland, either under the 1985 Act or the 2005 Act. There could be many reasons behind the lack of prosecutions. There is no doubt that for some people it's difficult to challenge family members. In some cases, there may not be enough evidence to prosecute. And sometimes professionals may be reluctant to speak out on what they mistakenly believe is a cultural or religious practice. We welcome the publication of the bill in today's debate. We are firmly behind the principal aim of the bill to strengthen legal protection for women and girls who could be at risk. The bill aims to make provisions for FGM protection orders. They are a form of civil order that can impose conditions or requirements on a person. The protection orders aim to protect a person from FGM and to safeguard people from harm if FGM has already happened. And while we firmly back the principles of the bill, in some areas we believe a further look is needed. As the Minister said, we believe that there needs to be more work done around victim anonymity. In their evidence, Police Scotland highlighted that there may be a need for automatic anonymity for anyone coming forward. They said there can be difficulty when dealing with incidents of FGM because victims have an inherent fear of repercussions. And without protection of automatic anonymity, the police said that there may be a barrier to people reporting this crime. And I am pleased to hear the Minister commit to come back to us before stage 2 of the bill on that. They also suggested this could be mitigated by the inclusion of FGM in the Vulnerable Witnesses Criminal Evidence Scotland Bill. That would see all victims of FGM having access to non-standard special measures, for instance, the use of a prior statement or providing evidence on commission. We also believe that more work needs to be done to remove barriers for those seeking help with FGM protection orders, for example, through the legal aid process. As the Law Society of Scotland said in their evidence, there are substantial implications of the bill. For instance, there are issues to consider involving raising awareness of FGM, an unacceptable practice within communities in Scotland. The Law Society feels that those at risk may not speak English as their first language, so they may experience problems communicating and understanding. Yeah, absolutely.
Smyth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank the member for taking an intervention. I wondered if she would also consider putting an argument to colleagues at Westminster about the fact that FGM really does need to be considered seriously with regard to asylum seekers. I think that's an important point that ought to be made.
Annie Wills.
Yeah, and I think I would be happy to write to the Secretary of State regarding that, just to see what their process is going to be going forward, because I know we received communication back to the committee, but I will certainly happily write to the Secretary of State on that as well, just to get further clarifications to how we can make sure that we are looking after these vulnerable women. And finally, we believe that there needs to be a look again at working with the frontline health workers to understand how data around FGM can be better recorded. The General Medical Council support the bill and recognise that the role doctors and other healthcare professionals can play. As part of this, they state that any statutory guidance should provide detail on additional responsibilities for healthcare workers. In summary, Presiding Officer, while we feel a further look is needed at some areas, the Scottish Conservatives support the broad principles of the bill. Clearly, FGM is an abhorrent practice that must be rooted out. We will support proposals that support victims of this crime, and we hope this bill can prevent FGM happening in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on Smyth to be followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to be opening for the Labour Party in this debate, particularly as I have a history of involvement with legislating on FGM in this Parliament. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for bringing forward this welcome addition to improve the already existing laws to prevent and eradicate, or to try to prevent and eradicate FGM. I also thank the committee for the work, and my committee colleague Mary Fee will be expanding more on that when she speaks. As FGM survivor Nene Bojang from Edinburgh said of this new bill, I was just 9 years old when I was subjected to FGM. It was excruciating and has caused me pain throughout my life. If this bill prevents even just one woman from going through the same, then in my eyes it will be a success. I served on the Equal Opportunities Committee when the Labour-led administration brought forward the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Scotland Act in 2005, and at that time we heard harrowing testimony from women who'd been subjected to this horrendous acts of violence, and they carried the scars and the health problems for the rest of their lives. I was the committee's gender reporter, and I met privately at that time with Somalian women out in the community. They were keen to share their experience, their medical problems, their trauma and their suggestions, but not to do so publicly. I think that's something that we really must reflect on. Therefore, in order to hear from them on the record at that time, the committee met in public, but the witnesses giving evidence were protected and given anonymity, and that was quite a groundbreaking way to gather the invaluable evidence, experiences and opinions to shape our legislation in this Parliament. There are really no words to describe how barbaric this procedure is, usually performed in small girls without anaesthesia and little or no hygiene, and often it can be fatal. From evidence gathering at the time, members of the Somali Women's Action Group could not believe that what we deemed to be a criminal offence against a UK national or permanent resident was not an offence against asylum seeker women and children at that time. My own amendments to the bill shaped the eventual legislation, and it became a criminal offence to have FGM carried out in Scotland or abroad against all women and girls. Turning to the situation in 2019, the WHO still estimates that more than 200 million girls and women alive today have undergone the practice, and that every year 3 million girls are at risk of undergoing FGM. Unfortunately, we don't have, I think, available data for Scotland as to the actual incidence of FGM. The Scottish Refugee Council, however, has estimated that around 24,000 men, women and children living in Scotland were born in a country where FGM is practised to some extent. Progress has been made on global efforts to eliminate FGM and, excuse me, Presiding Officer, thank you. And a girl is about 1/3 less likely to be cut than she was 30 years ago, and that's still far too many. And before we become complacent, UNICEF warns that population growth means that by 2030, more than 1 in 3 girls worldwide will be born in the 30 countries where FGM is most prevalent. So that will mean 68 million more girls at risk, which is quite alarming. Another worrying trend has been the medicalisation of FGM, where medical professionals normalise the practice by claiming safer methods make it acceptable. So they may argue that this is damage limitation, but it's still damage, and it goes against the ethics of the medical profession, and I don't think there's any justification. I think it's also important to note that there's not a religious requirement for this in any country or culture. However, it is a sensitive issue, and we must not stigmatise the communities where it is thought that women and girls are at high risk of FGM. The University of Bristol has recently worked together with the Somali community just this year, and the report produced is instructive. Safeguarding services already in place in England were found to be stigmatising and traumatising. The families who participated were already committed to eradicating FGM, and they found statutory approaches could be offensive and traumatic, especially considering that some of the mothers were also victims of FGM. School referrals led to unannounced home visits by social services and uniformed police officers. We must not repeat these mistakes here. These are issues that really need consideration, but there are also other issues. For example, midwives, like most of the professions who are key in the fight to eradicate and to help to eradicate FGM and to deal with the issues of FGM, are struggling due to funding cuts. The RCM noted its significant concern at the 26.5% vacant posts in midwifery and nursing. So if we're adding extra responsibility to teachers, medical practitioners, social workers and police, we cannot ignore vacant places, shrinking numbers and cuts to service. Presiding Officer, I'll just finish with this. A new strategy is definitely needed. In February 2019, we saw the first person in England found guilty of FGM. There have been no prosecutions in Scotland, and we know that doesn't mean that FGM isn't being practised. So, I welcome a strategy of prevention and protection, which must always avoid stigmatising and persecuting vulnerable members of our community. I look forward to following the passage of the legislation, and on behalf of Scottish Labour, I support the Government motion.
Thank you very much. And I call on Patrick Harvey to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And in opening a speech in a debate like this, quite often it's the norm to thank the committee for its work. That's particularly important in my situation for a political party that doesn't have a member on the lead committee. It's always an extra challenge to try to get to grips with the work that's been done. Usually the challenges are around the complexity of legislation. This isn't complex legislation, but it's legislation that raises highly complex issues. And the lived experience of the survivors of FGM, which I think all of us would recognise are difficult to learn about. And so I particularly want to thank the committee for the work that it's done in producing the report. The purposes that we should have are clearly twofold, and I think that's recognised in the legislation as well as in the wider work that the government has undertaken on this issue. Partly, it is to protect from the risk, protect women and girls from the risk that FGM would be perpetrated against them, but also to provide safeguarding and support for those who have already come through that experience, for survivors of FGM. And in both those purposes, looking at those who are at risk and those who are in need of support, there are complex issues that arise in terms of identifying those individuals who are in need or who are at risk. And I think the issue of racialisation, which the Minister touched on in the opening speech, is one of the first areas of complexity. And it gives rise to the overwhelming need to emphasise support and training for the kind of people working in settings where they may have concerns. And many people may have concerns but feel uncertain how exactly to express those concerns without feeling that they're at risk of stigmatising people in terms of racial groups or religious groups. And I think the committee's evidence reflects the balance of views on that difficult point as well. The need to be conscious of the risk of racialisation in the approach to this issue, but the need for that not to become a barrier to taking the action that is necessary. So I'm pleased that the committee has taken the time to consider that and has asked the Scottish Government to develop guidance and training. And I think that need for guidance and training is one of the themes that for me has come through many aspects of the report as well. Elaine Smyth talked about asylum seekers and refugees, and the committee's report does recognise the particular challenges in relation to asylum seekers and refugees. The lack of protection available through the asylum system, the failure to recognise within the asylum system that women may have been unable to relocate from one part of their country of origin to another in order to escape the risk of FGM, and the culture of disbelief that exists within the asylum system. That's clear throughout the whole of the asylum system, where overwhelmingly applicants for asylum are treated as guilty, assumption of guilt until innocence is proved. The absolute opposite of the way the asylum system ought to work. But where we're talking about a complex, sensitive and difficult issue to express, such as FGM, the risk of it or the experience of having gone through it or having family members who've gone through it, that culture of disbelief must be an insurmountable hurdle for a great many people in the asylum system, even to begin talking about these issues or to know who they can trust within the asylum system. Yes, indeed.
Smyth.
Thank you, President Officer, and I thank Patrick Harvey for giving way. Would the member also agree that language could be an issue as well in explaining?
Patrick Harvey.
Undoubtedly, and I think the language barrier is one of the biggest reasons why natural justice is so frequently failed within the asylum system, but particularly in relation to the issues that would need to be talked about in relation to FGM. It's a whole other level of language barrier that I think many people wouldn't even have considered if they weren't already closely familiar with the subject. I was interested as well to note that in perhaps a smaller section of the report, it mentions the fact that the WHO definition of FGM includes genital piercings. And again, a different professional setting in which people working in those settings may not consider themselves as people who need to understand or know about FGM as a wider issue, and where definitions would be very different. I'm sure we wouldn't want to approach that issue in the sense of trying to forbid or ban body modification practices that are taken as a choice by empowered individuals who are adults. But the fact that there is an ambiguity about the definition there gives rise to another level of complexity that may be difficult to pin down in law, the distinction between those who do take an empowered and informed decision as adults and those who are under cultural or coercive pressure or an expectation to undergo procedures that are not genuinely for their choice. Finally, Presiding Officer, all of these issues, all of them raise the importance of support and training again. And so I was interested that the committee was open to the idea of renaming the orders to include the phrase protection and support order. And I think that the government has, I think, considered whether it's going to be willing to look at that as the bill goes forward. Because training, support and the support services that we put around this legislation are at least as important as the legislation itself. That being said, the legislation is greatly valued and I hope that it will pass unanimously tonight.
Thank you. And I call on Alex Cole-Hamilton to be followed by Angela Constance.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I start by echoing thanks already offered to my fellow members of the committee, to the clerks and indeed, most importantly, to the witnesses who gave us a real education in this area, this very important area. I thank the Scottish Government very much for bringing forward this legislation and rise to speak in full-throated support on behalf of myself and of my parliamentary colleagues of this legislation, what will become a very essential piece of legislation. As Vice Convener of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee, it was a really important and sensitive topic. There were issues that challenged us and there were issues that surprised us. But I recognise, I think, that the tone this afternoon has been one of consensus, and I hope that this will be met with the entirety of the passage of this legislation through this Parliament, because it should command our consensus at every stage. And it demonstrates that it is clearly a subject that unites us all. It's a bill, or rather, when it becomes an act, it will not affect many people, and that is to be welcomed. It is a welcome reality. Nevertheless, the fact that we need to have this debate and this legislation at the end of the second decade of the 21st century is an indictment of where we still need to get to in terms of our global efforts towards modernity and the empowerment of women. Female genital mutilation is a clear manifestation of a patriarchal attempt to control and possess women. It's about men's power over women, and the victims of FGM are likely to experience short and long-term physical and psychological harm. And every year, nearly 3 million girls and young women are subject to acts of brutality and mutilation in the name of culture and of tradition. I want to take this opportunity to pay tribute to my colleague and former leader Jo Swinson, who strived throughout her parliamentary career towards the empowerment of women. And during the week of UN International Day of Zero Tolerance for FGM, Jo revealed this year the new statistics which show that health boards continue treating women experiencing FGM in some of Scotland's biggest cities like Glasgow and in Edinburgh. FGM is not only a cruel and traumatic practice, which should be eradicated, but an indication of a deep-rooted gender inequality which still prevails. I welcome the bill's aim to strengthen the legal protection for women and girls at risk of FGM, and already illegal practice effectively, and early interventions are key. However, it's not always possible. Therefore, I fully support the introduction of the new protection orders, which, in the words of Lethan Bartholomew from the National FGM Centre, give women the, and I quote, agency and the power not only to take a stance and protect herself, but also to protect her child. Protection orders, Presiding Officer, enable a preventative approach to be taken to avoid harm to a child or for them to be removed from the UK. During the Stage 1 consideration, a parallel was drawn between the creation of risk of sexual harm orders in the Children and Prevention of Sexual Offences Act and those of FGM protection orders. This parallel relates to the application of the proposed law and how often these might be used. Although the Sexual Offences Act came into force more than 10 years ago, the number of RSHOs that have been handed down or applied through the courts can be counted on one hand. It is a salutary lesson for this bill. Therefore, for this act to be effective and preventative, then we need to work together to develop effective guidance and awareness around FGM protection orders to ensure that the additional measures are in place for the police, the judiciary and all other stakeholders. I do also worry that this bill does not, unlike the United Kingdom's Parliament recent Serious Crime Act in 2015, include provisions for lifelong anonymity of victims of FGM. I'm not persuaded it's entirely justifiable to exclude this provision from our bill, and I'll perhaps work with us to test that at stage 2, because I don't believe that our justice system is materially different from the UK justice system. Both Police Scotland and the Equality Commission advocate anonymity in legislation and reference the difficulty in evidencing incidents of FGM due to fear of repercussions. Police Scotland state the anonymity would encourage women and girls to come forward and protect individuals without protection of automatic anonymity. There remains a barrier to such reporting. I will.
Ruth McGuire.
Hamilton for taking intervention. I just wonder if you would reflect on, I hear what he's saying about anonymity and we share some opinions on that. Anonymity for all victims of all sexual crimes might persuade more women to come forward. I wonder if that thing is bigger than just this bill and maybe it needs to be dealt with elsewhere.
Alice Cole-Hamilton.
I think the convener of our committee makes a valid point, a very reasonable point. And like I say, I'm not wedded to amendment at stage 2, but I think it's something we need to have perhaps a wider discussion in the context of all sexual crime. And I absolutely take her intervention in the spirit in which it was offered. Finally, I'm glad that this bill is grounded in a rights-based approach. All of our bills should be, with its policy firmly rooted in Article 24 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which calls for the prohibition of all traditional practices that are detrimental to the health and well-being of women. I'm firmly of the belief that when we fully incorporate the UNCRC into Scots law, as this government is prepared to do, that we will finally make rights real in that context. And in striving to be a human rights leader, we must act now, as we cannot lead the world from the back of the pack on children's rights. Government, Parliament and community leaders within our society all have a central role to play in the matter, but it's also about public participation and challenging arcane, brutal traditions, abandoning certain attitudes towards the education of girls. As we have heard, there are challenges in respect of terminology, but embarrassment, should not prevent us from discussing the issue for whatever reason. And to make real progress, we need to talk about these issues, to bring them forward, encourage others to do so, and to move forward in the atmosphere of consensus that we have displayed today. And we support the bill.
Thank you very much. We move on to the open debate. I would encourage all members to keep their remarks to 5 minutes or less. Angela Constance, to be followed by Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I only joined the Equalities and Human Rights Committee in September, and it's been a pleasure to serve on it because all members, under the quiet but nonetheless determined stewardship of the convener, Ruth McGuire, come to committee with a deep commitment to a fairer Scotland, but also with a very genuine desire to work together. And this has been evident in our scrutiny of the Female Genital Mutilation Bill, which led to the presentation of a unanimous Stage 1 report to the Government. And I'm pleased that the Minister's response to committee has been equally collaborative. As we know, FGM is illegal, and the purpose of this bill is to update and strengthen protection for women and girls at risk of this practice by creating new protection orders and putting guidance on a statutory footing. FGM is a fundamental violation of human rights. It's a manifestation of deep-rooted gender inequality. It's a breach of international law and causes short and long-term physical and psychological harm, and there are absolutely no health benefits from it. The bill was widely supported by stakeholders, but crucially it was informed by the lived experience of survivors. And Elaine Smyth powerfully quoted earlier the testimony, the personal testimony of Nineve Bojang. And as the Minister said in her opening remarks, if this bill prevents even just one woman from going through the trauma of FGM, it will have been worthwhile. And it is crucial, Presiding Officer, that the voices and the testimony of women and their communities is at the very heart of engagement and the development of statutory guidance in particular. The experts are those with lived experience, and we need to make an enduring commitment to survivors that participation and engagement is ongoing and not a one-off event. And this approach is absolutely essential to minimise the risk of stigmatisation and even racialisation as expressed by some committee witnesses. And in her evidence to committee, the Minister and the convener in her opening remarks today rightly state that FGM has been practised across many countries, many continents and communities and belief systems for about 5,000 years, and it is indeed a global issue. One of the many complex issues that committee wrestled with was the lifelong automatic anonymity for survivors. And there were mixed views about this, and at present in Scotland, these matters are decided by the courts on a case-by-case basis. But after much thought and deliberation, committee concluded that it is the views and wishes of individual survivors in individual cases that should be paramount and central to court considerations. And I know the Minister, along with other matters, made a commitment to reflect and come back before stage 2. There was also an acceptance that, based on the evidence heard and received by committee and not politics, that this legislation should be different to what exists south of the border. And again, there was a cross-party concern about the lack of consistency in the treatment and consideration of FGM within the asylum system, therefore leading to a lack of protection for women in the asylum system. Again, points made by both Elaine Smyth and Patrick Harvey. And collectively, the Equalities and Human Rights Committee, I believe, has worked very hard to both test and tease out the added value of this bill, given that FGM is currently illegal, there are existing child protection measures, there is a national action plan to prevent and eradicate FGM, and a very honest reflection that legislation alone is rarely a silver bullet, particularly for crimes that are often hidden. But when you consider the need to protect women and girls of all ages, to better support 16 and 17-year-olds who are not always captured by the children's hearing system, and the need to build quite bespoke measures for both protection and support, I believe the case for this legislation is very well made. So I want to say well done to the Minister on what I believe is her first bill in her current role, and I want to thank her team and also the committee clerks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I call Maurice Corrie to be followed by Mary Fee.
Thank you, Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the publishing of this bill today, and it is my pleasure to speak in this debate. Female genital mutilation, or FGM, otherwise known as, is a pervasive form of gender-based violence that millions of women and girls in the world face. And as we know, it is recognised internationally as a gross infringement upon their human rights, and steps must be taken to prevent and eliminate this practice. In 2011, it was found that around 24,000 individuals living in Scotland were born in countries that practice some form of FGM, and from 2001 to 2012, 2,750 girls were born in Scotland to women from these communities. Even with this data, it is still not known how many people within these communities are directly affected. By nature, FGM is a matter of hidden complexities. It makes it difficult to create a solution that adequately addresses such harms in order to prevent them and support those already impacted. Current legislation provides a broad range of policy and tools to help support the victims and survivors of FGM. And in 2005, the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Act was introduced, which increased the maximum penalty to 14 years of imprisonment and changed the terminology from mutilation to circumcision. This removed any possible justification for execution of such an act, and the aim was to ensure that the legal protection in Scotland was equal to that of the rest of the UK. Additionally, the National Action Plan to tackle FGM was implemented in 2016. It introduced measures to train staff of statutory agencies on FGM, such as how to talk to survivors, how to identify those with an imminent risk of FGM, and those on which it had already been performed, and strengthening information sharing on FGM. These steps have opened up the conversation concerning FGM and how to effectively tackle it. This new bill crucially builds upon this already existing legislation as a step further in protecting the rights of women and girls. By enabling individuals to obtain a female genital mutilation protection order, or FGMPO, Those at risk can be provided with a proactive means of protecting themselves or their daughters from FGM. I am totally supportive of the legislative steps towards this bill which it makes. But there are areas which require further examination and discussion as the bill advances. The ability to obtain a specific FGM PO is a helpful approach, but we must consider the process behind acquiring the protective order. Because of the nature of the FGM PO within the legal system, access to legal advice and assistance would be advantageous to ensure an accurate and successful application. This raises a number of concerns regarding barriers that will impede those who need it most from acquiring this integral protection. We need to consider how accessible the legal system will be for those most at risk. As many of them come from different countries, our legal system may be understandably overwhelming and confusing. Legal aid will provide them with an invaluable guide to successfully negotiate a system that may be unfamiliar and daunting. Secondly, the ability to pay for the national legal aid is also important. Not all FGM PO applicants will be eligible for legal aid, and some women will simply be unable to afford it. No woman or girl should be put at such devastating risk because of the lack of financial resources. We must take note of these barriers and consider how they can be removed to ensure that individuals can navigate applying for and acquiring an FGM PO in a timely manner. Enacting legislation does no good if it is unable to help those most in need. Yes, certainly.
Minister.
I wonder if Maurice Corrie would then join with me, because I intend to write to the UK Government on all of these measures. But some of the issues that he raises in his speech there is around about how the asylum system works along with protection orders, and would he support the calls from this place that some of that be devolved to here so that we can deal with it here? But also, can he take on board the issue we've got round about no recourse to public funds and how some women are affected by that too?
Maurice Corrie.
I thank the Minister for her intervention, and I totally understand what you're saying, but I think we must look at things in individual cases, and not everyone is the same. But certainly we will be, as my colleague here, Annie Wells, has just said, we will be taking up issues which Elaine Smyth brought up and writing to the UK Parliament. And I'm sure in discussions with Annie, we'll look at some of these issues concerned. But you raise a very important point, and yes, we will certainly consider that. In addition to eliminating the barriers to acquiring a protective order, the question concerning the anonymity of victims must also be fully examined. While it is not currently included in this bill, it is a subject which should be carefully considered and further explored in relation to how we can most effectively provide support to FGM victims. Because of the hidden and private nature of FGM, the most effective way to identify victims and obtain evidence is from the victims themselves. And every step, Presiding Officer, must be taken to ensure that these women and girls feel comfortable and confident in being able to report their experiences and being protected from the possible associated repercussions. Whether this means automatic or anonymity by being granted, or that victims are provided with a clear and assured path of gaining anonymity, which has already been talked about at their request, all options must be considered, and the concerns and wishes of the victims must be central in consideration of decisions taken. And in closing, Presiding Officer, the new measures introduced by this bill have the potential to bring about necessary change, and in order for change to be as effective as possible, we must consider and eliminate all possible barriers. And these measures, when coupled with robust education and training, will do much to demonstrate the ongoing commitment that Scotland is taking to eliminate FGM practices. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Mary Fee to be followed by James Dornan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by thanking the Scottish Government for bringing this bill to the Parliament for consideration. And my thanks are also extended to the witnesses, including women and girls affected by FGM, who assisted the committee during a Stage 1 inquiry. And without their input, it is difficult to fully understand the effects and the harm that FGM causes. And their evidence to us was invaluable. FGM is rightly illegal. However, consideration must be given to how we can prevent it, and that's what this bill aims to achieve. And I fully support the aims to strengthen the protection for women and girls who are at risk of female genital mutilation. And, Presiding Officer, female genital mutilation is not limited to any race, to any religion or to any country. And it is believed to have occurred for over 5,000 years across the world and across religions. And we were told during our evidence sessions that it has been performed in adherence to religion, in adherence to cultural traditions and as a rite of passage. It does not benefit women and girls in any way. It leads to lifelong physical and mental health problems, and it is a form of abuse and control. And I understand the government's and some witnesses' position in relation to racial profiling. However, I do think there must be clear guidance and training to ensure that no person feels stigmatised or criminalised. And I welcome the comments made by the Minister in her opening remarks on how this piece of work will be taken forward. We heard during our evidence sessions on medical services that NHS Lothian applied a policy of universal inquiry. However, this is not seen in other parts of the country. And to prevent people feeling targeted because of their race or their religion, there must be a universal policy for all public services that deals with justice and women's sexual, mental and medical health. And in relation to guidance and training on reaching out to women and girls, there must also be wider training and education, and this is backed up by experts who provided evidence to the committee. And on education in schools, which is crucially important, I back calls for FGM to be consistently taught in schools to both boys and girls. And schools now include human rights education. And as this is a human rights violation, this allows schools to better educate around the issue of FGM. And the Scottish Government in its response says that FGM is covered from S1 and abuse and being protected from abuse is covered at P5. But I do wonder if there is scope for the specific issue of FGM that could be covered at an earlier stage, particularly if girls are a target for FGM prior to starting puberty and their teenage years. I do accept that there may be concerns around the age and stage of children when discussing the issue of FGM, but I wonder if perhaps the Minister could consider that either in a response in closing tonight or at a later stage. And it is very important that men are also taught about the dangers and lifelong consequences of FGM. And there is an issue around this discussed in the Stage 1 report. And our report says that the role of boys and men in FGM conversations was also raised by the men at Community InfoSource. Men said that they were not aware of FGM happening in their own communities or their own families until they attended workshops with Community InfoSource. And it is evident that such workshops are fundamental in the pursuit to eradicate FGM. And, Presiding Officer, I fully support the introduction of the FGM protection orders, and they will play an integral part in protecting and supporting women and girls from FGM, and hopefully eradicate its practice in Scotland, and for those living in Scotland, including, as has been previously mentioned, asylum seekers, and this is a crucial issue for me. Anne Spears, the Deputy Chief Executive Officer from Multicultural Family Base, rightly suggested that the word support be added to the orders. And support is an integral aspect in tackling FGM and helping victims. And it is right that the Scottish Government speak with stakeholders while considering the recommendation. And I do hope that they do this. However, with or without the term support included, the orders will serve the same purpose. And I wanted to touch on anonymity, but I see we are short of time. But can I just say that I'm grateful for the comments that have been made by the Minister about the intention to look at this issue and come back to committee prior to stage 2. And, Presiding Officer, can I finish by once again thanking the women and girls who so openly and honestly spoke to us and shared their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on James Dornan to be followed by Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have a members' debate tonight on a completely different type of abuse on women, financial coercive control. But female genital mutilation has always struck me as a particularly brutal and extremely harmful type of abuse. Some religious sects call this practice sunnah and refer to FGM as a religious cleansing. However, as has been said before, the practice is strongly condemned in all religions. In fact, the ritual of FGM predates any particular religion. As Annie Wells said earlier on, performing FGM has zero health benefits and is physically and psychologically damaging to women and young girls. Those who have been victims of FGM can suffer a multitude of consequences such as infections, urinary tract infection, menstruation problems, no sexual desire, pain during sex, complication in childbirth, and unfortunately on some occasions even death. There's no acceptable justification for this. And I commend the Equality and Human Rights Committee, led by my colleague Ruth Maguire, for spearheading efforts to update Scottish action on this intolerable and senseless abuse towards women and girls. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 200 million women and girls alive today have undergone FGM in one of its many forms. They also estimate that every year a further 3 million girls are at risk of undergoing female genital mutilation. And whilst the rates of female genital mutilation in Scotland are unknown, the NHS records patients where they can who have undergone it. 27 in 2018, NHS Lothian identified women with FGM on at least 93 occasions, and in the same amount of time, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde identified 138. That's at least 231 women too many who have received this horrendous treatment. As FGM is illegal in Scotland, young Scottish girls are often taken abroad on summer holidays without knowledge of the real reason for their travel. These procedures are usually performed using traditional methods with no anaesthetics or antiseptics, and often by someone who has no professional medical expertise. Genital mutilation is traumatic, often carried out with knives, scissors, glass shards or razor blades. It's often, normally, non-consensual, and I cannot begin to imagine what nightmares these women and girls endure as they are physically restrained and subject to tortuous procedures. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Parliament has got an admirable record in this. They've been fighting against FGM for some time. But I'm proud to say that the Scots have been at the forefront against this barbaric practice for almost a century. Dr John Arthur, a missionary from Glasgow, campaigned in 1929 to stop the Kikuyu in Kenya from carrying out this practice. He recognised that the senseless suffering women endured through clitoridectomy had no basis in Christianity and that it should not be tolerated. He encouraged those baptised Kikuyu to urge the Kikuyu Central Association to end the practice. He campaigned so vigorously in this matter to the point that he resigned from the Legislative Council and also saw his personal reputation being traduced by the British and church authorities because of his passion to protect these women and girls. And at the same time, his fellow missionary, Marion Stevenson from Forfar, introduced the term sexual mutilation of women. She also taught Rahili Warigia, who, along with other Tumutumu women, formed an organisation called the Shield of Young Girls to protect girls from FGM. The group wrote, "People are being caught like sheep. One should be allowed to follow her own way of either agreeing to be circumcised or not, without being dictated on one's own body." I think we could all agree with that. Stevenson saw FGM as part of a concerted attack on women's rights and used FGM as a focal point that she could campaign to expand women's rights, such as establishing girls' schools, which among the basic subjects also taught domestic sciences, hygiene, as well as training many teachers and working in hospitals. This clearly demonstrated to her that in many cultures, FGM forms part of the fight to curtail women's societal rights. This bill strengthens the current legislation and delivers on the promises made in the Scottish Government's National Action Plan to prevent and eradicate FGM. And although FGM is a hidden and deeply complicated problem, we all, the Scottish Government and the rest of us, must play our part in being vigilant in our efforts to eradicate it. It is clear there is no complacency in the Government's approach to the fight to bring this abuse towards women to an end. This bill is an important part of that fight, and that is why I support the general principles of the bill at stage one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call on Michelle Ballantyne to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There is no justification for female genital mutilation. No religion condones it, and there are no health benefits. Its practice is violent and a barbaric assault against women and girls. During a debate in November 2017, I recounted my first encounter with FMG. I was a student nurse at the time, and the patient was herself a victim of FMG who had given birth to a daughter and had then begged us not to discharge her. Her husband planned to take their child straight to the airport, whereupon she would be taken out of the UK, and that perfect little girl would then undergo female genital mutilation. Back then, there was nothing that we could do. We delayed her discharge as long as we could, but eventually we had to let her go. And I had the job of carrying that baby down to the car alongside her distraught mother. Presiding Officer, it is an experience that I have never forgotten. And in summing up for my party on that debate, I said that I hoped the Cabinet Secretary had listened to the comments in the debate and that she would take forward some of the actions to ensure that Scotland followed the UK's decision to enact FMG protection orders. It is therefore extremely welcome that this Parliament is now debating stage 1 of this bill, and I personally thank the Minister and the Cabinet Secretary for making good on the promises to take this forward. The creation of FMG protection orders is an important milestone in development of legislation to prevent this foul practice. In this respect, Scotland has lagged somewhat behind England, Wales and Northern Ireland, all of which introduced FMG protection orders in 2015 as part of the Serious Crime Act. That said, there have been concerns raised about the need for specific protection orders. It was noted in some consultation responses that FMG protection orders were not always the best instruments to counter this issue. While I agree with some of what the Law Society and SCRA's views said, that existing legislation does cover these offences, I nevertheless think that the right decision has been made to introduce a specific protection order. Not only does it signal intent, it deals with what is a very complex and problematic area of society and criminal law, and it can provide an immediate intervention to prevent a crime occurring. However, given the impact these orders can have on families, particularly when strong personal relationships and high levels of familiar influence are at play, these orders are not enough on their own and should not be seen as the solution to every instance when a case of potential FMG is reported. FGM, sorry, I keep muddling my words. As Ruth Maguire described in her contribution, the order may provide protection, but it will not address the cultural and family ties that accompany the practice. A stronger framework and increased duty on professionals to report such crimes can only serve to help tackle this hidden crime. And data collection is also key. The evidence clearly shows this. As a spokesman for NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde admitted this year, we don't have confirmation that it is being practiced in Scotland, and the Scottish Government also said there are no clear and robust figures for the prevalence of the practice in Scotland because of the hidden nature of the crime. Yet we know there are cases, as hospital records clearly demonstrate so. We can introduce all the legislation we want, but unless we improve our methods of identifying and reporting suspected instances of this crime, we will continue in the same blind spot created by the 1985 Act, where young women were coming to hospitals with clear signs of mutilation without a single case being successfully prosecuted. So I do believe that SCRA's view to favour strong statutory guidance for professionals working with young people who are at risk is important. And we have seen in England and Wales that although social and healthcare professionals are obliged to report incidences to the police when it involves individuals under 18, many of these staff do still not fully understand the implications of the Serious Crime Act and the duty it bestows upon them. Without these people taking the first steps, protection orders will do the victims little good. While I very much welcome the publication of the multi-agency guidance published by the Scottish Government, the onus is still on getting the guidance right as a key to eradicating female genital mutilation in Scotland. Efforts must also be made to ensure that guidance does not simply gather dust on local authority office shelves. Rather, it must be embedded in the minds of frontline workers who are best placed to identify girls at risk, understand the family dynamics, and act quickly and effectively to avoid a potential offence. Underpinning all of this is, however, I believe, the absolute need to ensure that witnesses and potential victims will be given anonymity. And I do agree with some of the conversation that that should be lifelong, because the fear and distress women and girls experience must not be underestimated. And this is often compounded where English may not be their first language, and cultural pressures are significant. In closing today, I absolutely welcome the consensus that I've heard in this chamber. The message we are sending in taking this bill forward is that female genital mutilation is not a subject we are divided on. It is cruel, it is abhorrent, and no society should ever allow it to be carried on. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Rona Mackay before we move to closing speeches. Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I warmly welcome the principles of the Stage 1 FGM Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill, and I'm pleased to have the chance to speak in this debate today. Presiding Officer, female genital mutilation is physical and coercive abuse of women and girls. There's no other way to describe it. The word mutilation says it all. FGM violates the rights of women and girls and has lifelong physical, sexual and mental health implications. It has no health benefits, quite the reverse. It is, of course, illegal and it is abhorrent. As we've heard, the aim of this bill is to strengthen the legal protection for women and girls at risk of the procedure by enabling the court to make an FGM protection order, a civil order, to protect a person at risk of being subjected to FGM and safeguarding them from harm if it's already happened or reducing the likelihood that FGM offences will happen. It will be a criminal offence to breach an FGM protection order. An application can be made by a person at risk, a victim, a local authority, Police Scotland, the Lord Advocate or any other person with the permission of the court. Anyone breaching the order would be committing a criminal offence with a potential prison sentence of up to 5 years. So we know FGM has been illegal in Scotland since 1985, but to date there have been no criminal prosecutions brought in Scotland, with one being brought in England. Presiding Officer, I think that says it all about the need for this bill. The multi-agency guidance in FGM reinforces Scotland's child protection guidance, but it is currently advisory. The proposed FGM protection orders and statutory guidance will complement this system. Although FGM is an international practice, we in Scotland have a duty of care to those who live here, and this bill will give protection to the most vulnerable. The Law Society's helpful briefing points out that this is not the first step taken by the Scottish Parliament in FGM. It builds on the Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Scotland Act 2005 and implements Scotland's commitment in the National Action Plan to prevent and eradicate FGM. Its aim is to foster an environment of prevention in Scotland and to provide the welfare and quality of life of FGM survivors, with a focus on the linked areas of prevention, protecting girls at risk and provision of appropriate support and sensitive services for survivors of FGM. There's no doubt, Presiding Officer, that communication and education to intervene early are keys to the success of this new bill. In addition, we do need reliable data to determine the exact scale of the problem in Scotland. The Scottish Refugee Council published a report in 2014 estimating the location and number of Scottish communities affected by those who've come from countries practising FGM to be around 24,000, which provides some indication as to the scale of the issue. Presiding Officer, I have to say that number shocked me and highlights the desperate need to raise awareness of the bill within the relevant cultures and communities. We must overcome language barriers and cultural differences within our public services, such as the NHS and the police, who do a fantastic job of inclusiveness, to simply say, no, this is not acceptable. And I agree with Mary Fee, we must reach girls within the school curriculum as part of our GIRFEC strategy and regard this as a child protection issue. If we can protect girls at an early age by educating them against the dangers of this practice, then issues surrounding older girls and women will be eradicated. There also needs to be clear guidance on how to report issues around a protection order, and we must win the trust of potential victims and communities most at risk, so they know they will be protected in Scotland. Presiding Officer, anonymity is not specifically provided for in the bill, in contrast to the position for victims in England and Wales. So I support the committee's view in the Stage 1 report to ensure that the views and wishes of victims and survivors are paramount, and anonymity on request is a reasonable expectation for victims of FGM. Given the nature of this abuse and the sensitivity surrounding it, I think that anonymity should be included. Access to legal aid for victims is also extremely important, as without this many vulnerable groups may not feel empowered or simply financially able to proceed with legal action. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I want women and girls to live in a world where they feel safe, one where their rights will not be violated and their futures ruined. And I believe this bill, when it reaches Stage 3, will give women and girls that protection. And it will send out a message that Scotland is a country that values all its citizens and is striving to keep them safe with legal protection and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we move to closing speeches. Elaine Smyth to be followed by Miles Briggs. Elaine Smyth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've heard some harrowing stories of women subjected to FGM, and the Minister herself opened with a powerful example. James Donnan also gave an example. And Ruth Maguire asked us not to doubt the stories because they are real. I think that's a very important point that we need to bear in mind. And Annie Wells explained what exactly FGM is, which is important to know but hard to listen to. It is a global issue, and as I said earlier, we can't be complacent about successes in eradicating the practice.
And as Maurice Corrie mentioned, it is clearly a form of sex-based violence against women and girls, a point also made by Rona Mackay in her speech. Today, just as in 2005, there is much to be done to challenge the views which normalise the mutilation of mainly girls under the age of 15. Alex Cole-Hamilton made the point about a patriarchal culture, but could I just make the point again that others have made, that there is no religion that actually agrees with FGM or requires it. I think it's important that we note that. In February this year, in response to an FOI request, we heard that NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde and NHS Lothian had treated victims of FGM on more than 230 occasions in 2017-18, figures that were also mentioned in his speech by James Dornan. And it can be difficult, I think, to deal with. So, for example, when women have to be cut open to deliver babies and then they're asking to be re-sewn because that's all that they have known, then that is a real challenge for people working in the health service, and it's something we have to bear in mind. FGM is now illegal in all EU member countries, but the number of successful prosecutions is still relatively low, with the exception of France. The threat of imprisonment and large fines alone are not enough as a prevention strategy, but the evidence from France also highlights how intrusive and stigmatising prevention strategies can sometimes be, and I think we have to be very, very careful. Here in Scotland, we must refocus our efforts to work with families, communities and community leaders to deliver the necessary information and the benefits of abandoning this barbaric practice, and I think this bill will very much help to do that. I welcome the multi-agency approach of the new legislation, and I note Mary Fee's pleas for education in schools and a consistent approach across services. The committee convener Ruth Maguire made the important point too that when we identify communities where the practice is still prevalent, we must not racialise the issue or victimise people who are already victims themselves. And that is especially relevant when we look at how enablers of FGM, or people who don't report it, are treated. Often they're women who do not have the power or ability to prevent it, and therefore should not be criminalised. We have to give people confidence to discuss, challenge and report the practice, which can be deeply embedded in their traditions. And that's the same as the Equal Opportunities Committee did in 2005. And I think that raises the issue then of anonymity, which both Mary Fee and Rona Mackay spent some time talking about. We then have to give people the support to use the law to either protect themselves or someone else at risk of FGM. And I was very pleased to hear Annie Wells say in the intervention that she took from me that in the case of asylum seekers that she would write to the Westminster Government. Patrick Harvey, Mary Fee and Angela Constance also outlined the issues around the asylum system that need dealt with and challenged, including the language barrier. We must also make sure there are adequate funds to train professionals to apply for the protection orders when they're needed, and I note that support should also be included. That was a point made by many members during the debate. Michelle Ballantyne gave a powerful example of, I think, the need for this during her speech, a powerful personal example. I welcome the more consistent multi-agency response, but I do see service after service stretched to its limits. And I think that can make it difficult for the health service perhaps to provide the services needed. Many services are underfunded, understaffed, and we can add to the additional burdens, and therefore we have to add to their funding and their allocation to back up the strategy. Sadly, I think we can only expect more austerity from Boris Johnson's government in Westminster, but many of the services which will be involved in this prevention strategy are funded by local government, so I would urge the Scottish Government to stop the underfunding of councils in Scotland. Presiding Officer, I don't want to finish on a negative note. I think that this is a debate that unites us all, as some people have said, some members have said, and I know the Minister cares passionately about tackling violence against women and girls. It's a small but important piece of legislation. It enhances the good work that's gone before, and I congratulate Christina McKelvey on her first bill. Can I make the point that in 2005, our legislation here was better than the Westminster legislation, so I just throw that into the mix as well. I thank the committee for their work in scrutinising stage 1 of this bill, And as Mary Fee said, thanks to the women and girls who gave evidence, working together, respecting and listening to the communities involved, I'm sure we will move forward towards the eradication of FGM in Scotland and abroad. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Miles Biggs to wind up for the Conservative Party.
Officer, and I'm pleased to close today's debate for the Scottish Conservatives, and actually believe it's been a useful, constructive and positive debate we've had today. And I thank those organisations who have provided briefings for members, including the Law Society of Scotland. I'm also grateful to the colleagues we've heard today from the Parliament's Equalities and Human Rights Committee for producing such a thorough and thoughtful Stage 1 report. In addition, we should also put on record, I believe, praise for the charities working on the front line of this, including the Shakti Women's Aid and Scottish Refugees Council. As my colleague Annie Wells has indicated, Scottish Conservatives very much support the aims of this bill and look to strengthen it as we move through the stages in Parliament. And we will be backing measures to put in place legal and criminal positions that are designed to support victims as effectively as possible and punish and deter those who actually perpetrate these abhorrent practices. FGM protection orders are therefore a major and welcome step forward. Last year, I met with prominent women's rights campaigner Nice Nalente Lingete, who was presented with the People's Postcode Lottery Hero Award in recognition of her work to end FGM in Kenya. The work of the Amref Health Africa UK support charity saw 4 years of dialogue with elders in Nice's village to change literally hundreds of years of culture and abandon cutting of girls in Africa. One of the key things they saw was a surge in the number of girls attending school after that was taken forward. And much of today's debate has rightly focused on how we improve the bill and the committee's constructive recommendations on how we take this forward. As Maurice Corrie outlined, we believe further work on the bill is required, and we've heard that today from a number of members as we look to back calls for the government to set out clearly how we can engage with women involved and communities to develop further guidance and awareness around FGM and these protection orders. The committee specifically asked ministers to address difficulties around prosecutions in light of the fact that there's only ever been one UK prosecution for FGM, and I think that's important going forward. And while reasons for the lack of prosecutions are varied, not least the difficulty in challenging family members and mistaken belief of some professionals, we should look to actually take forward this, and it would be useful as we move towards stage 2 to actually look at that in more detail. And I agree with what Police Scotland, for example, have said around Scottish Government should also give thought to potential gap in legislation to cover when someone is found with items in their possession suggesting their intent to carry out FGM. I think that is something we also need to take forward. There may be merit in considering a preventative offence around intent for possession of items for the purpose of FGM. And I welcome what the Minister had to say on this, and Ministers considering that at stage 2. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I wanted to again very much welcome the provisions of the bill, especially in relation to the creation of FGM protection orders, which have the potential as such to be a useful tool for our agencies and individuals in taking forward FGM guidance at a statutory level. Communities and professionals must be very closely involved, obviously, in the creation of this guidance. And we very much hope this legislation will play another part in helping to achieve the societal, cultural and attitudinal change necessary to both eliminate FGM here in Scotland, but also to send the message out across the world. I wanted to conclude with Nice's words at that event, where she said, "The practice is devastating for the health, rights and chances of young girls, and we won't stop until every girl in Africa can be the woman of her dreams." As has been said by members across the chamber today, if this legislation we will put forward in Scotland results in just one individual in Scotland not facing the barbaric practice of FGM, it will have been worthwhile, and we support the general principles of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on the Minister to wind up our debate.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to close the Stage 1 debate on the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill. It's been an excellent debate with absolutely fantastic points raised, and I want to try and get through lots of the points raised. If I don't get to them all today, they're all on my list, don't worry. But I wanted to very quickly run through some of the issues that's been raised. Mary Fee raised a very important issue about how we change culture and we work with men and boys. I'll send her some information on the Change Makers project that we currently fund, which is men working with men and boys to combat FGM in communities. James Donnan raised an issue about summer holidays. Part of the FGM protection order will remove travel documents like passports in order that that summer holiday doesn't happen. And Michelle Ballantyne suggested that the Scottish Government is lagging behind of the rest of the UK, maybe in bringing legislation forward. However, we do know there is challenges with the UK Act, and we wanted to take our time to work with communities and consult with them appropriately to get it right the first time, because unintended consequences could have incredibly harmful consequences. Ruth Maguire, Patrick Harvey and Mary Fee and many others raised the issue that came out of committee about racialisation. I want to reassure all of them that we will work closely with stakeholders and others to ensure that we work on the training is cognizant of all of these issues, and we will be guided by communities on the best way to reflect that and the issues in the development of the statutory guidance and the subsequent training. And I'd like to reassure Angela Constance, because she asked whether I would commit to ongoing participation, not just a one-off, and the answer to that is very clear, yes. On guidance and training, let me see, Alec Cole-Hamilton, Angela Constance, Ruth Maguire all talked about a person-centred approach, and to assist with the specific and effective operation of future statutory guidance on FGM, we will work with stakeholders. I can't reference that enough, and Ruth Maguire and raising the digital stories is something that we will take into account to ensure that that core training adequately reflects the position of FGM, including the updated legislation too. I want to reassure Elaine Smyth in her comments about health experience both in Scotland and England. We've taken a real interest in this, and we're taking that forward, and we're working very closely with our health colleagues when we develop the guidance and the training to ensure that we get that absolutely right. Patrick Harvey talked about lived experience. This is at the heart of everything that we do, and I hear Mary Fee's calls for that universal approach too. Rona Mackay, Alec Cole-Hamilton and others talked about raising awareness, and part of the work of the National Action Plan, we are committed to raising awareness of FGM and the harms it causes. Specifically, we want to ensure that statutory services work with partner agencies and community organisations to raise awareness of the rights of women and children to be free from FGM. I will commit today to working intensively with community-based stakeholders to ensure that that awareness of orders and understanding of how to obtain them is front and centres. And both Annie Wells, Maurice Corrie, Alex Cole-Hamilton and others raised the issue around anonymity. We have noted the committee's view that we will respond before stage 2 on this, because it's a very important point, but we note that the committee has not recommended automatic lifelong anonymity as articulated by Angela Constance. We've got a justice system in Scotland that's based on justice being open and accessible, and that includes being able to provide anonymity if circumstances justify it. And I think that's the point. If there's a child involved, we do have other statutory provisions that we can use. On the issue around asylum seekers and FGM protection orders, both Ruth Maguire, Elaine Smith's interventions, because she had a few, Patrick Harvey and Angela Constance, I will be writing to the UK Government on this point. It's an incredibly important point. You had heard my intervention on Maurice Corrie on that, so I wanted to give some reassurance around those points as well. On legal aid, which is another big issue that came up and many people raised it as well. Again, Annie Wells, Rona Mackay and others raised the issue around legal aid. The majority of cases of FGM protection orders will be sought by public authorities, so therefore the need for legal aid will not be there. However, if that individual is a child, and legal aid would normally be subject to means testing of the income of the parents, but only where it is not unjust or inequitable to do so. But it's worth noting that in 2018, independent strategic review into legal aid, Rethinking Legal Aid, highlighted Scotland's current legal aid spend per head is a third highest in the European Union. Given that FGM protection orders would often not always involve the consideration of restrictions on parents, we think it highly likely that such means testing would always be unjust and inequitable. In these circumstances, legal aid would be granted. And we will continue to engage with the Legal Aid Board and others to ensure these issues are taken into account in implementing the bill. The other issue that was raised quite clearly was around about data collection and recording. The Chief Medical Officer and Chief Nursing Officer issued a letter in July 2014 to help healthcare professionals in the NH recognise FGM, the services that are most likely to come across the condition, and to record the diagnosis of the types of FGM in clinical letters. We are working with the FGM National Action Plan Implementation Group to ensure greater consistency with regard to data collection policies and FGM across different NHS board areas. Miles Briggs raised the issue that Police Scotland had raised in their evidence to committee, and it may be helpful to note that the circumstances set out by Police Scotland would, I think, be covered in this bill. So if granted, a Type 3 FGMPO could provide that such items, people who have got an intention to cut, would be prohibited, and they would be prohibited from possessing these, and this would be a criminal offence as well. So hopefully that will reassure Police Scotland in that respect. Presiding Officer, Michelle Ballantyne gave us a very clear picture of what happens when a woman is subject to FGM. And I wanted to conclude by paying tribute to a very special young activist, Nene Bojang. She lives not that far from this place, and she underwent FGM at the age of 9. And like Waris Derry, she is an activist against the practice. I was privileged to launch this bill with her, and that's what I mean about having the lived experience of people right at the heart of this. Can I congratulate Elaine Smyth on her long-term commitment to all of this? Because the first time I heard a debate on FGM was when Elaine Smyth spoke about it, I think maybe probably in 2005. Presiding Officer, if this bill, as Nene Bojang told us, even just one woman stops one woman from going through the same thing as me, she said, as me, then in my eyes it will have been a success. Presiding Officer, I think in our eyes that will be a success too. So once again, I commend the general principles of the bill to the Parliament and move the motion in my name. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our debate this afternoon. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 20241 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau, setting out a business programme. Could I call on Graham Day to move the motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. No one has asked to speak in the motion. Could I therefore put the question that motion 20241 be agreed? Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. And we turn to decision time. One question this afternoon, which is that motion 20223 in the name of Christina McKelvey on the Female Genital Mutilation Protection and Guidance Scotland Bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you very much. That concludes decision time. We're going to move shortly to members' business.
How do you mean no more commission?
Well, no one in Scotland can commission an idea. You know, if I went to BBC Scotland and I said, oh, I've got this great idea for a sitcom, I've got this brilliant idea for a drama, you know, no, there isn't one person in Scotland that can okay it unless it goes through London.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Full Scottish. What's happening today?
Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon, as our First Minister, has been doing.
My feeling about Boris Johnson is he can't be trusted on anything.
That is now and forever will be known as the rape clause.
I'm old enough to remember going into Europe in '73, and I remember how much of a razor's edge that was a balanced stone. And I think we made it by 53%, if I remember correctly, for going in. And ever since that time, England particularly has been pretty much schizophrenic, down the middle about whether it felt British or whether it felt European. And that schism, that crack has remained throughout English society ever since.
Scotland means business. Scotland's voice won't be stilled, it won't be silenced, it has to be heard.
about the work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.